Sera, a Dungeon Revival LitRPG. By Mizar Kaf. Chapter 31 Ice Queen. Power surged through Sera, electrifying her senses with an intensity that made her gasp. The raw energy crackled within her, filling every fiber of her being with an overwhelming force. As the essence of winter, no, Amaryllis, coursed through her veins, she felt a profound transformation taking hold. Her fingers tingled as the sensation spread, first through her hands and then racing up her arms, seeping into her very core. I feel invincible. The oppressive heat of Ermos Ma was quickly replaced by a frigid cold that radiated from deep within Sera's soul. The chill spread outward, driving away the clinging warmth, as if the very essence of winter was asserting its dominance over the infernal heat. Sera could feel her body shifting, adapting to accommodate the power now flowing through her. Ice antlers sprouted from her forehead, their crystalline structure twisting and curling into a dazzling display of glimmering frost. The weight of them was unfamiliar, yet they felt right, as if they had always been a part of her. Her usual black dress shimmered, the fabric rippling as it morphed into something entirely new. The dark material transformed into a pristine white, each fold and crease sparkling like fresh snow under the soft glow of moonlight. It was a dress fit for a queen of winter, resplendent and untouchable. Around her, a blizzard began to swirl, the icy wind whipping through the air with a ferocity that matched the power coursing through her. Countless snowflakes manifested and gathered around her, forming a protective cocoon that both shielded and exalted her. It's time. Sera forced herself out of Ermos Ma, moving with newfound strength. The beastkin's massive form froze over almost instantly, the fire that had once fueled him now extinguished by the relentless cold. His body stiffened, the flames flickering and dying as his flesh turned to solid ice. Sera stepped out of the frozen Ma, her new form radiating an aura of icy authority that seemed to command the very elements around her. Her breath was visible in the frigid air as she dusted off her dress, sending a flurry of snowflakes cascading to the ground. Vittorio staggered back, eyes wide with shock. Impossible, how are you alive? Sera's gaze locked onto him. The power surging through her amplified her voice, distorting it into something both resonant and eerie. The answer to that question shouldn't be your concern at this moment. Vittorio's form crackled ominously as purple flames erupted around him. With a guttural roar, he launched himself toward her with a wide-open maw. Sera remained perfectly still, not flinching in the slightest as Vittorio closed the distance. Despite only having this sort of power for the first time, she knew exactly how to use her abilities. It's a familiar feeling, just like when I played chess with Zoha. With nothing more than a thought, she summoned a gargantuan icicle from the earth beneath them. The frozen spear shot upward and pierced through Vittorio's flaming body with a sickening crunch, the sheer force of it driving him upward and pinning him to the prison ceiling. Vittorio writhed against the icy spear, his once powerful flames flickering wildly as he struggled in vain to break free. The purple fire that had once been so fierce now looked feeble, the cold of the ice sapping its strength with each passing moment. His eyes now reflected a growing desperation as he thrashed against the unyielding ice. Sera watched his futile struggles with an expression of cold detachment, her gaze as unfeeling as the ice that held him captive. There was no pity in her eyes, not even the slightest sympathy. How utterly pathetic! Vittorio's eyes blazed with unbridled fury, the flames within them flaring as he thrashed against his icy restraints. His fire roared to life, desperately attempting to melt the ice that held him captive, but the ice remained resolute, unyielding in the face of his frantic efforts. Each pulse of heat was met with an unforgiving cold, the frozen prison absorbing his flames without so much as a crack. "Release me," he bellowed, his voice filled with rage and desperation. Sera stepped closer, her presence emanating an almost palpable chill that seemed to suck the warmth from the very air. The cold radiated from her like an aura, the temperature plummeting as she approached. She stopped just short of him, her gaze as icy as the frozen spires around them. "No," she replied, her voice flat and unwavering, carrying the weight of finality. With a mere clench of her fist, Sera commanded the gargantuan icicle piercing through Vittorio to shatter. The sound was deafening, a thunderous crack that echoed through the chamber as the ice exploded into a storm of jagged shards. Vittorio was torn free from the ceiling, plummeting to the ground below. Before he could fully gather his bearings, Sera raised her hand and splayed her fingers splayed wide. The ground beneath Vittorio shuddered before a massive, black hand, encased in jagged ice armor, burst forth from the earth. The hand moved with terrifying speed, wrapping its fingers around Vittorio's body. Sera's eyes glinted with cold determination as she slowly clenched her hand into a fist. The black hand mirrored her action, tightening its grip around him with relentless force. Vittorio gasped, the pressure constricting his upper body, squeezing the breath from his lungs. With a swift flick of her wrist, Sera released her hold. The black hand shattered into countless shards of ice, each one razor-sharp as it splintered into Vittorio's flesh. The icy daggers embedded themselves deep, puncturing his skin and drawing fresh rivulets of blood that seeped from the myriad of wounds. Vittorio cried out as he slumped to the ground, strength draining away with each passing second. Sera walked towards him with her very presence causing the air to grow even colder. Frost had now completely encased the ground, creeping forward towards Vittorio's prone form as if seeking to claim him for the cold. Soon, she came to a stop directly in front of his head and looked down. "I know you've still got some fight left in you, get up." Vittorio's body trembled as he tried to comply. He managed to lift himself slightly before collapsing again, the strength leaving his body. Sera scoffed, lips curling into a bitter smile. "If that's how it's going to be, I'll help you rest for good." Raising her hand once more, Sera summoned another icicle from the ground. It shot up with deadly precision, piercing through Vittorio and pinning him to the ceiling. Soon, the flames around him flickered and died as his form reverted to its human state. With Vittorio dead, Sera let out a slow breath, her icy gaze shifting away from his lifeless form. The frigid air around her softened slightly as she turned her attention to Ermo, whose frozen form remained locked in a painful grimace. "I should go and restore him now." But when she approached Ermo, a voice called out from behind her. "What do you think you're doing?" Sera spun around, eyes wide in surprise. Standing before her was Amaryllis. The ethereal figure shimmered slightly, her presence almost surreal. Sera blinked a few times, trying to ascertain if she was hallucinating. "Amaryllis? What are you doing here?" The Winter Dryad shook her head slowly. "Relax, I am but a temporary illusion, here only because of the power I lent you. Soon, I will fade away as will the temporary strength you have gained." Sera nodded, accepting the explanation. "Then why are you here? What is it you want to tell me?" Amaryllis stepped closer. "I am here to prevent you from doing something stupid." "Care to elaborate?" "Like wasting your energy and time on allies. You are immortal. Allies come and go, but your power will always be with you. Relying on others will only lead to disappointment. That's a cynical view. Allies are important, even to the strongest individuals. No one can face everything alone, thinking as much is merely hubris." Sera retorted. "Hubris? Though you've been bestowed with great knowledge since your creation, there is still much that you do not know. Do not taint yourself with weakness, not while you're striving for divinity. With all due respect, it sounds like you're giving me this advice less from a place of good reasoning and more due to a prior bad experience you had." Amaryllis's icy gaze lingered on Sera, the silence between them heavy and frigid. Then, ever so slightly, the corners of her lips tightened, and she shook her head slowly. The sound of her exhale filled the space, a cloud of frost escaping her lips, curling and dissipating like a breath in the dead of winter. "You have no idea." Sera's gaze drifted to Ermo, his form encased in a thick layer of frost, every strand of fur crystallized in a sheen of white. The ice clung to him, tracing the curves of his body, making him appear more like a statue. She then turned back to Amaryllis. "Listen, I'm not going to die for him, but I'll certainly try to keep those who work for me in a reasonable condition." Amaryllis scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're being too idealistic. Why are you so intent on lecturing me about going at things alone?" "Because, you and I are transcendent beings. We control magic unlike any other entity in this world. Depending on others will only hinder your true growth." Sera's gaze was unwavering as she replied, "True strength lies in understanding the value of making use of enemies and allies alike. There's nothing wrong with making things easier where possible." Amaryllis chuckled, lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "I've said enough," she murmured, the words slipping out like the last breath of a dying wind. "When you finally have an empire of your own, and your strength has ascended to divinity, that is when you will know I was always right." Sera blinked, and in that brief moment, Amaryllis vanished, leaving behind only the cold space where she had stood. The chill that had clung to the air started to dissipate as if it had been drawn away with the Winter Dryad's departure. The icy antlers atop Sera's head had begun to melt, each crystalline tip dissolving into droplets that traced winding paths down her face and neck. Her pristine white dress had dulled and darkened, the fabric shifting back into its familiar, inky black. She knew she had little time left before Amaryllis's lingering magic dissipated completely. I should check on Ermo before the last of her power leaves me. Sera's gaze snapped to Ermo, whose form lay eerily still. She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees with a grace that belied her worry. Her hands hovered above his chest before she gently pressed them against him. The deep cold that had seeped into his body met her palms, numbing her fingers and sending a sharp ache through her senses. Sera closed her eyes for a brief moment, focusing inward, seeking the faintest signs of life within Ermo. There, under the layers of frost, she sensed it, a faint, struggling heartbeat. It was weak, like a flickering candle on the verge of being snuffed out, but it was there. Good, I didn't expect a beastkin shifter to go out that easily. When Sera opened her eyes, she drew on her own magic, feeling its familiar warmth pulse through her. The frost that clung to Ermo's fur slowly melted, tiny rivulets forming as the ice relinquished its hold. She watched as the cold, brittle layer cracked and splintered, breaking apart in fragmented pieces that tumbled away to reveal the natural color of his fur beneath. When the last of the frost dissolved, Sera pressed her hand more firmly against Ermo's chest, feeling the faint, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath her palm. The skin under her touch was cold, lifeless, but she refused to let it stay that way. A warm, greenish light began to blossom from her hands, spreading slowly but steadily into Ermo's chest. The light pulsed gently, its glow soft and nurturing, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through the heavy clouds after a long winter. Sera channeled it with care, guiding the energy with precision. As the light enveloped Ermo, his body responded to its touch. The greenish glow seemed to seep into his very being, and slowly, the massive limbs that had been warped by his transformation shrunk and receded as his form reverted to its original state. The harsh, bestial features that had overtaken his visage smoothed out, gradually turning back into the familiar contours of his beastkin self. Sera leaned in closer, her eyes never leaving Ermo's face as she watched the transformation take place. His eyes slowly blinked open, their hazy, unfocused gaze slowly sharpening until they settled on her face. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a deep, weary breath as his body adjusted to movement once more. "Boss. I feel like I've been hit by a boulder. What happened?" Sera slid her hands to support his back, helping him sit up. "You transformed and lost control. There was a battle, and you were frozen. I thought you out and healed you as best as I could." Ermo's gaze drifted around the room, taking in the remnants of the battle, the shattered ice, the lingering traces of magic, and the still form of Vittorio pinned to the ceiling. "Is that Vito?" Sera's eyes followed his to Vittorio's lifeless body. "He's dead, I killed him." Ermo nodded slowly, his mind still reeling as he processed everything that had transpired. The weight of it all settled heavily on his shoulders. Thanks, boss." Sera nodded in return, her tone distant but cordial. "It's fine, I did only what I had to do." Chapter 32 Arcana. Adventurers Guild, Capital Branch. Haziel drew stairs as she pushed open the heavy oak doors to the Adventurers Guild. The hall inside was vast and bustling, a hive of activity that momentarily stilled at her entrance. The more Haziel walked inside, the murmur of conversations faded to hushed whispers. Adventurers turned in their seats, their eyes widening at the sight of her. Some whispered to their companions, casting furtive glances in her direction. Others averted their gazes entirely. A panicked elf girl hurriedly rushed over from the front desk. Her eyes were wide with anxiety as she approached the Inquisitor. "Welcome, Inquisitor Haziel," the elf girl stammered, bowing slightly as she reached her. "How can we assist you today?" Haziel's stern gaze locked onto the elf girl, who fidgeted nervously under the weight of her stare. "I need to see the records of the latest dungeons registered within the last 3 months." The elf girl stuttered, eyes darting around the room as if seeking help. But those documents are confidential, Inquisitor. Only authorized personnel can." Haziel's eyes narrowed, cutting the girl off mid-sentence. "If you refuse to cooperate, I will arrest you for treason. Do you understand?" "Why yes, Inquisitor. Please follow me." She fumbled with a set of keys at her waist, her fingers shaking as she tried to find the right one. Eventually, she unlocked a door behind the front desk and pushed it open. Haziel followed the elf girl down a narrow, dimly lit stairway. The air grew cooler as they descended, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a large archive room filled with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, each one crammed with ledgers, scrolls, and documents. The elf girl led Haziel to a table in the center of the room, her movements hurried and frantic. These are the archives, I'll show you the relevant records. She scrambled to a nearby shelf, pulling out a thick ledger with both hands before placing it on a nearby table, the heavy book landing with a thud. This ledger contains all the dungeon registrations for the past 3 months, the elf girl continued, her voice still shaking. It's... Haziel cut her off with a dismissive wave. Leave. Your services are no longer needed. The elf girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded quickly and scurried out of the room, closing the door behind her. Haziel watched her go, ensuring she was truly alone before turning her attention to the ledger. She opened the thick book, the leather cover creaking slightly. The pages were filled with neat, precise entries, each one detailing the location, difficulty, and contents of newly discovered dungeons. Haziel's eyes scanned the records, searching for any anomalies. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The records appeared thorough and accurate, listing various dungeons with their respective dates and explorers. However, as she flipped through the pages, a faint sensation tingled at her fingertips. Haziel paused, her eyes narrowing as she concentrated. She could sense the faintest traces of magic lingering on the pages. She turned the pages slowly, her senses attuned to the subtle magical residue. It was scattered and random, with no discernible pattern. Some entries felt perfectly normal, while others carried a faint, almost imperceptible aura. The inconsistency frustrated Haziel, making it impossible to determine which records might have been tampered with. After several more minutes of fruitless searching, Haziel sighed in frustration. She closed the ledger with a decisive snap and returned it to its original spot on the shelf. The faint traces of magic had left her with more questions than answers. I still need more information. She made her way back up the narrow stairway, the air growing warmer as she ascended. The hustle and bustle of the guild hall greeted her once more as she emerged from the archives. Adventurers glanced at her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, their conversations hushed as she passed by. Haziel approached the guild receptionist desk, where the elf girl from earlier was busy organizing paperwork. The girl looked up, her eyes widening in surprise as she saw Haziel again. Inquisitor Haziel, is there something else you need? Is the guild master available? Haziel asked, her tone sharp and direct. The elf girl hesitated, glancing nervously towards a door at the back of the hall. Sorry, but the guild master hasn't returned here since the war began, she said, her voice uncertain. Haziel sighed. Very well, she said, turning away. Thank you for your time. Haziel stopped in front of the Capitol Concert Hall. The towering columns and intricate stonework exuded an air of elegance and history. She reached into her pocket, retrieving a finely crafted pocket watch. The gold casing gleamed in the afternoon sun as she flipped it open, revealing the delicate hands pointing to 3:47 p.m. As she stood there, several guards approached. However, upon noticing her inquisitor's uniform, their expressions quickly shifted. They bowed their heads respectfully and stepped aside as they recognized her authority. She quickly went inside and made a beeline towards an empty auditorium. The stage was bathed in soft light, and her gaze immediately fell upon Dante. He stood at the center, his posture relaxed yet focused, the violin nestled under his chin. A woman played the piano beside him, fingers dancing over the keys with practiced ease. Soon, the woman glanced up and noticed Haziel standing in the shadows of the auditorium. Her fingers faltered on the keys, a look of panic flashing across her face. Dante, she whispered urgently. There's an inquisitor here. Dante opened his eyes and paused his bow mid-stroke. The soft, melodic sound from his violin ceased as he turned his head slightly towards Haziel. A calm smile spread across his face. Elise, I think you should take a break while I treat our new guest. Elise nodded, though her expression remained uneasy. Her hands trembled as she quickly gathered her sheet music, each page rustling softly in the otherwise silent room. Thank you, Dante. She cast a nervous glance at Haziel as she passed before disappearing through a side door. Dante set his violin and bowed down gently on a nearby stand, ensuring they were perfectly balanced. He descended the stairs from the stage unheard despite the unexpected interruption. When he reached the bottom, he approached Haziel with a charming smile that barely reached his eyes. Haziel, to what do I owe the pleasure? Haziel crossed her arms and scoffed. Save the pleasantries. Do you know anything interesting in relation to dungeons as of late? Dante's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of mild confusion. He tilted his head, brows knitting together in a subtle frown. Dungeons. I'm afraid I don't know anything about that. My focus has been entirely on my music. He gestured vaguely towards the stage, where his violin was waiting. Could you perhaps let me continue my practice? There will be no show until I'm done questioning you, Haziel said sharply. Dante chuckled lightly, though there was no humor in it. Well, if this isn't a performance, then I'm in trouble. My acting skills are terrible. Haziel's eyes narrowed as she reached into her leather satchel, the worn material creaking softly. She produced a thick stack of documents, bound together with a fraying ribbon. She handed them over to Dante, her movements precise and deliberate. Read this, she instructed, her voice low but firm. Dante hesitated, glancing at the bundle in his hands. What is this for? Just read it. With a resigned sigh, Dante untied the ribbon and skimmed through the pages. As his eyes scanned the lines of text, his expression shifted from confusion to concern, then to a deepening dread. The documents detailed a chilling pattern: every time Dante performed, someone in the vicinity disappeared. Witness testimonies, timelines, and ominous red marks indicating the missing persons peppered the pages. Regardless, Dante tried to play it off. These are just coincidences. I have nothing to do with these disappearances. The Inquisition has been keeping a close eye on you. Your performances and these vanishings are too closely aligned. Someone always goes missing whenever you play. I don't know anything about this, and what does this have to do with you trying to ask me for information regarding dungeons? Please cut the bullshit. Every noble and major merchant in the capital knows who you are, and I'm confident you would at least know something useful for my investigation. But, should you refuse to cooperate, I'll drag you to the inquisitorial headquarters and have you questioned for those disappearances. Dante's shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, defeated sigh. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on the stage, his beloved violin, and finally back to Haziel. Fine. But let's not talk here. Haziel's eyes remained cold, unyielding. Don't try anything stupid, she warned, her hand subtly resting near the hilt of the dagger strapped to her waist. Her voice was laced with an edge that brooked no argument. Dante shook his head, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. I'm not trying anything. We can talk in my private room. It's just down the hall. Haziel's eyes flicked over Dante with a sharp, appraising glint, lingering just long enough to make him uneasy. After what felt like an eternity, she gave a brisk nod. Lead the way. But remember, any sudden moves, and this conversation will end very differently. Dante returned her nod, though the tightness in his throat betrayed his nerves. He turned and started walking, the sound of his footsteps barely audible over the low hum of activity from the main stage. Haziel followed closely, moving like a shadow at his back. They wound through the backstage corridors until they reached the end of a particularly long hallway. Dante's steps slowed when he neared his private room. He paused, hovering a hand over the brass door handle, fingertips brushing the cool metal as if hesitating to fully commit. Go on. Open it. Haziel said. Dante inhaled deeply, the breath catching slightly as he tried to steady his nerves. With a resolve that felt almost forced, he pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a few flickering candles and the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. A grand oak desk dominated one corner, cluttered with scattered sheet music, quills, and the remnants of half-finished compositions. The rich scent of aged paper hung in the air, mingling with the faint smell of whiskey. Make yourself comfortable, Dante offered, though his voice carried a slight tremor. He headed towards a polished mahogany cabinet where he reached for a crystal decanter filled with whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light as he poured himself a generous measure. The scent of the liquor was sharp, filling the air as he raised the glass to his lips. He took a sip, the warmth spreading through his chest, but it did little to quell the anxiety tightening his stomach. Let's get to the point, Haziel said. I need information. Tell me any information you have regarding dungeons behaving oddly as of late, or at the very least, point me to someone who does know. Dante took another sip of his whiskey, trying to buy himself a moment to think. He met her gaze, forcing a look of sincerity onto his face. I've told you already, I don't know anything about dungeons. I'm just a musician. I play my violin, and that's all. Haziel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. And yet, every time you perform, someone goes missing. How do you explain that? It's a coincidence, Dante insisted. People go missing all the time. It has nothing to do with me. Haziel's expression hardened, and she let out a slow, controlled breath. You're lying, Dante. The evidence is too consistent to be a mere coincidence. Who are you working with? And do they have any ties to the dungeons? I swear, I'm not working with anyone, Dante said, shaking his head vehemently. I don't know anything about it. I just play my music. That's all I've ever done. Haziel's eyes bored into him, unrelenting. You expect me to believe that? Dante felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. I don't know what else to tell you. Maybe someone is trying to frame me. I've made no enemies, but someone out there could be targeting me for some reason I don't understand. Haziel sighed, a sound filled with a mix of frustration and disappointment. She rose from her chair, her hand moving to the hilt of her rapier. You're a terrible liar. Before he could react, Haziel drew her rapier and plunged the blade through Dante's chest. His eyes widened as searing pain flooded his gaze. The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor, amber liquid pooling around the shards. Haziel's grip tightened as she withdrew her rapier, the blade slick with an unexpected shade of purple blood. Her brow furrowed in surprise, the unfamiliar hue momentarily arresting her. She reached for a cloth from her belt, methodically wiping the blade clean. No, it can't be. Turning back to Dante, Haziel's eyes widened in disbelief. He was already on his feet, calmly brushing the dust from his sleeves. Haziel's gaze hardened. She channeled her will into her rapier, summoning tendrils of lightning that crackled and danced along its blade. The red arcs cast eerie, flickering shadows across the room, bathing everything in a spectral glow. Demon! She hissed, her voice low and venomous. Dante responded with a slow, mocking smirk. He reached into his pocket with an almost lazy motion, extracting a card. He held it between two fingers, ensuring Haziel had a clear view. The card was exquisitely detailed, the intricate design depicting a figure hanging upside down, bound by one foot to a twisted tree. The number 12 was etched at the top, and beneath it, in elegant script, were the words, The Hanged Man. Chapter 33 Great Delusion. The intense red of Haziel's irises glinted as she channeled her energy. Her rapier thrummed in her grip, the vibrations resonating up her arm with barely contained power as scarlet lightning streaked along its edge. Her muscles coiled and released in a fluid motion as she drove the rapier through Dante's stomach. The blade sank deep, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Dante's eyes flew wide open, shock and pain forcing his mouth open. His pristine suit blossomed with crimson as blood sprayed from the wound, soaking the fabric and splattering onto the ground. Dante's breath hitched in his throat. He coughed violently, a mouthful of blood spewing forth and splattering on the stone floor. His knees gave way under the force of the blow, and he crumpled as strength drained from his body. For a moment, Haziel's gaze was fixed on Dante as she gripped the rapier tighter. She watched, almost detached, as the demon's face contorted in agony. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Dante's body shimmered, the image wavering like a mirage before vanishing entirely. Haziel's eyes widened, disbelief flooding her senses as the weight of the rapier felt suddenly hollow in her hand. She spun around, the air thick with tension, just in time to see Dante materialize behind her. He was still standing, completely unscathed. Missed me already? Dante reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out a card that glowed with a vivid, ominous red. The light from the card bathed his hand and face in an eerie glow, enhancing the menace in his eyes. Let's see how you handle this. With a flick of his wrist, Dante sent the card hurtling through the air toward Haziel. The Inquisitor barely had time to react before the card exploded in a blinding flash of light and searing heat. The explosion's force hit her so hard that she was sent stumbling backward. As the smoke and debris cleared, the shimmering outline of ethereal wings unfolded from Haziel's back. Each feather glowed with an otherworldly luminescence, the delicate barbs catching the light in a mesmerizing dance. The wings had absorbed the brunt of the explosion, shielding her from harm. Haziel took a deep breath, feeling the comforting weight of her wings before she dispersed them. The light faded, the feathers dissolving into the air like mist in the morning sun. She regained her composure, eyes locking onto Dante. How did you survive that? Dante's let out an amused chuckle. Oh, I was just lucky. Care to try again? Haziel's grip tightened on her rapier as she drove the blade into the ground. The steel met the stone with a resounding crash, and a trail of lightning surged from the point of impact. The electric tendrils crackled and sparked, racing along the ground toward Dante. The moment the lightning reached him, it surged up his body and enveloped him in a blinding aura of light and energy. Dante's screams echoed through the chamber, his body convulsing violently as the electricity coursed through him. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air, mingling with the smoke that rose from his now charred form. Haziel watched as the last sparks of lightning dissipated. She approached his body with slow steps, heart pounding in her chest. Yet, when she reached out to examine the remains, Dante's form shimmered once more. Before she could touch him, he was sucked into the floor, disappearing from sight. The stone beneath her feet rippled like water, then solidified, leaving no trace of his presence. Haziel desperately looked around the room, taking in every detail with heightened awareness. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a war drum in her ears. Suddenly, a deafening explosion erupted behind her. The blast wave hit her like a battering ram, lifting her off her feet and hurling her forward. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Pain lanced through her back, as if countless needles had pierced her skin. Despite still being dazed, Haziel managed to push herself up. Her vision blurred for a moment before sharpening as she forced herself to focus. She turned to see Dante standing there with a triumphant look plastered across his face. "Impressive," he drawled, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But not quite good enough." Haziel gritted her teeth, the pain in her back throbbing with each breath. She forced herself to stand, willing her wings to flicker back into existence. "You won't get away with this." Dante laughed. "My dear Inquisitor, I believe we're just getting started." But suddenly, the door to the room burst open, wood splintering as a handful of staffers rushed in. "Is everyone all right?" one of them called out, stepping forward cautiously. Immediately, Haziel's eyes flared with a malevolent intensity. She extended her hand, fingers crackling with red lightning that danced across her skin. Several bolts lanced through the air, their red hue staining the room in a crimson glow, and struck the staffers directly. Their screams were brief, cut off abruptly as their bodies convulsed and crumpled to the ground, lifeless and smoking. Dante's laugh was a low, dark chuckle. "You know, it's usually demons who kill innocent people." Haziel's gaze snapped to him as she opened her mouth to retort. That was, until a sharp, searing pain tore through her skull, forcing her to clutch her head with a wince. The agony was blinding, a white-hot spike that momentarily blurred her vision. Seizing the opportunity, Dante flicked his wrist, sending a flurry of enchanted cards hurtling toward her. Each card ignited on impact, explosions rocking the room and enveloping Haziel in a storm of fire and smoke. The force of the blasts sent shards of debris flying, the heat scorching the walls. When the smoke finally cleared, Haziel stood amidst the wreckage. Blood seeped from numerous wounds, staining her clothes and dripping onto the floor. Yet, her face was twisted with an even more intense rage as arcs of red lightning danced around her like a storm. "Amaryllis, I'll kill you myself!" Haziel screamed. Dante's smirk faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his features as he saw the intensity of her fury. "Amaryllis? Look, I don't know who you think I am, but you've got the wrong person. Whatever or whoever you're angry about, it's not me." But Haziel was beyond reason. "I won't forgive you for everything you did." She lunged at Dante and drove her rapier into his chest. The blade pierced through his flesh with a sickening crunch, the force of the impact pinning him to the ground. His eyes widened in shock and pain as a purple stain blossomed across his chest. Above them, the sound of rolling thunder built to a deafening crescendo, each rumble vibrating through the walls and floor. Haziel's eyes burned with a fierce intensity as she raised her hand upward. In a split second, a massive pillar of lightning crackled to life, its electric red tendrils writhing and twisting as it descended from the sky and shattered the ceiling. The bolt struck with unrelenting force, enveloping both of them in a blinding flash of light. The sheer power of the blast bored a large, smoking hole into the ground. The floor beneath them crumbled into a cascade of rubble and debris, causing them to plummet into the darkness below. Both Dante and Haziel crashed into the murky water below with a tremendous splash. The impact sent waves rippling through the cavern, and for a moment, all was silent except for the distant echoes of dripping water. Haziel surfaced first, body aching from the battle and the fall. She looked around, adjusting to the dim light filtering through large cracks in the cave ceiling. Gathering her strength, she manifested her wings, their ethereal glow illuminating the dark water around her. With a powerful thrust, she flew out of the murky depths, water streaming off her as she soared above the surface. After hovering for a few seconds, Haziel let her wings dematerialize and landed lightly on the water's surface. Her weight did not break the tension of the water, allowing her to stand as if on solid ground. She took this chance to look through the cavern, trying to find Dante. Suddenly, Haziel sensed movement and turned just in time to see a sword hurtling towards her. She dodged to the side, the blade slicing through the air where she had stood a moment before. More swords followed, flying at her rapidly. Haziel twisted and turned as she evaded each strike. The swords that missed her shimmered in the dim light, their edges glinting before transforming into silver-colored cards. Each card hung in the air for a brief moment, catching the light before dissipating into thin air, leaving no trace of their existence. The Inquisitor's muscles burned with exertion, but she pushed on, her focus razor-sharp on the swords in front of her. Yet, she was so intent on the barrage that she failed to notice the silent approach of a sword behind her. Pain exploded through her back as the blade plunged into her flesh, the sensation sharp and searing. Her eyes widened in shock, and she coughed up blood, the metallic taste filling her mouth. Her vision blurred, dark spots dancing at the edges as she staggered forward, trying to maintain her footing. Dante's voice echoed through the cavern. "All right, do me a favor and die this time." Haziel's rage flared as she discharged a massive bolt of red lightning from all over her body. The crackling energy surged through the air, the sheer force of it sending Dante flying into the water with a resounding splash. Then, Haziel manifested her wings and dove into the water after Dante, her wings propelling her with incredible speed. The water churned around her, creating whirlpools in her wake. Her rapier, gleaming with a deadly light, sliced through the water as she slashed and stabbed at Dante repeatedly. Each strike found its mark, drawing blood that mingled with the murky water. Dante gasped for breath, his eyes wide with panic as he struggled to fend off her attacks. The look of terror on his face fueled Haziel's rage, driving her movements with an unstoppable force. She was relentless, her fury manifesting in every motion. Her rapier cut through the water like a predator's fangs, each strike delivering pain and drawing purple clouds in the water. But just as she was about to deliver the final blow, Dante's hand shot to his pocket, pulling out a red card. This one glowed much brighter than the others, its light almost blinding in the dark water. The ensuing explosion was immense, a blinding burst of energy that tore through the water. The shockwave hit Haziel with the force of a tidal wave, sending her hurtling backward. She collided with the cavern wall, the impact knocking the breath out of her and sending a burst of pain through her body. After what felt like an exceedingly long amount of time, Haziel managed to open her eyes. The first thing she noticed was the rough texture of the cave floor beneath her cheek, the cold, jagged stone pressing into her skin. She coughed, her throat raw, expelling a mouthful of water that had pooled in her lungs. Each cough sent a jolt of pain through her chest, but she managed to force herself to sit up eventually. Haziel looked around, taking in her surroundings with a slow, methodical gaze. The cave was now dry, the once roiling water having receded, leaving behind a damp, musty smell. The walls were lined with sharp, crystalline formations that glinted faintly in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the ceiling. Stalactites hung from above like jagged teeth, and the ground was littered with small, glittering stones and patches of lichen. A faint trickle of water echoed somewhere in the distance, a reminder of the battle's aftermath. Pushing herself to stand on her feet, Haziel swayed slightly as her body felt like it was protesting every movement. She glanced down at her uniform, which was now a tattered mess. The fabric was torn and shredded, exposing patches of bruised and bloodied skin. Her chest armor was dented, and the insignia of her rank was barely recognizable beneath the grime and damage. Unfortunate, but could be worse. Her eyes scanned the cave, searching for her rapier. She squinted, trying to make out shapes in the dim light. Finally, in the far corner of the cave, she spotted a glint of steel. Her heart quickened as she made her way towards it. When she got closer, she recognized the familiar hilt of her rapier, half buried beneath a pile of rubble. After a brief exhale, Haziel knelt down and carefully extricated the weapon from the debris. With her rapier securely in hand, Haziel took a deep breath, the familiar weight of the weapon providing a sense of comfort and resolve. She manifested her wings, the ethereal feathers shimmering as they unfurled. Looking up, she launched herself into the air, each wing beat sending a gust of wind echoing through the cave. As she ascended, the walls of the cave blurred as she flew. Haziel landed in Dante's room, her wings dematerializing as her feet touched the ground. The room was eerily silent, the aftermath of their confrontation evident in the scattered sheet music and overturned furniture. A grand oak desk stood askew, papers strewn across its surface, and a bookshelf against the wall partially collapsed, its contents spilling onto the floor. Stepping cautiously, Haziel navigated the room and looked for any clues or remnants of Dante's presence. But there was no sign of the demon, only the stark emptiness left in his wake. As she moved, her foot pressed down on a loose plank, the wood creaking under her weight. She paused, dematerializing her wings and taking a moment to steady herself before walking towards the door and opened it, stepping into the corridor. The concert hall was now filled with guards. I must have been knocked out for a good while. One of the guards, a tall man with a stern face and a prominent crest of rank on his chest, spotted her and hurried over. Inquisitor Haziel, he greeted, his voice laced with concern. Are you all right? What happened to you? Haziel just stared at him blankly for a moment. Right. I'm an Inquisitor, but what was I doing here? Inquisitor? Are you all right? Why yes, I'm fine, Haziel said, glancing at her tattered uniform briefly. However, I'll need a change of clothes. The guard hesitated, his expression shifting to one of regret. I'm sorry, Inquisitor. We don't have any spare clothes to give. Haziel sighed, but she nodded in understanding. It's fine. I'll find something on my own. After exploring more of the hall, she saw a side door leading to the backstage area. The good part of being an Inquisitor was that nobody dared to question Haziel as she walked toward the door, even despite the fatigue evident in the slight drag of her feet. She pushed the door open, revealing dimly lit passageways lined with props and costumes for the concert performances. The air smelled of dust and old fabric, mingling with the lingering scent of perfume. Haziel's eyes scanned the racks of costumes, their varied colors and textures blending into a chaotic tapestry. She needed something practical and inconspicuous. Finally, her gaze settled on a simple yet elegant ensemble, a dark tunic and trousers, accompanied by a long cloak. Looks roughly around my size too. She quickly changed, fingers trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons and adjusted the fit. The fresh fabric was a welcome relief against her skin, cool and soft compared to the rough remnants of her uniform. She fastened the cloak around her shoulders and adjusted her rapier at her side, the familiar weight grounding her. Chapter 34 Tranquility. When Haziel walked along the bustling streets of the capital, she felt something different. Not in a bad way, but undeniably altered. The sensation was subtle, like a faint vibration under her skin that tingled with every step she took. Actually, on second thought, I feel quite good. Her eyes wandered over the scene around her, absorbing the details with a sharp clarity. Shopkeepers stood outside their storefronts, calling out to passers-by with practiced ease while families strolled together, parents holding the hands of excited children who tugged them eagerly towards the next distraction. An elderly couple sat on a bench with their hands intertwined. And street vendors hawked their wares, their colorful carts brimming with exotic fruits, trinkets, and handmade crafts. How long has it been since I had a good walk by myself like this? I'll enjoy myself while I can. Amidst the lively scene, a ball rolled to a stop at Haziel's feet, its surface scuffed and worn from countless games. She looked down, the unexpected interruption pulling her from her thoughts. A group of children ran towards her, flushed with excitement and a hint of apprehension. One of the boys, who had his hair tousled and eyes wide, called out to her. Sorry, miss, can you pass the ball back, please? Haziel's lips curved into a genuine smile, a rare softness touching her usually stern features. She bent down, her fingers brushing the rough surface of the ball to straighten it, then, she kicked it gently back towards the children, the ball arcing through the air before landing precisely at their feet. Here you go, just stay safe next time, okay? Okay. The children's faces lit up with gratitude and delight. They waved at her as they resumed their game, the sound of their laughter echoing through the street. Haziel then continued her walk, until she spotted the display window of a quaint bakery. The glass was filled with an array of golden brown loaves, each one perfectly shaped and radiating a tantalizing aroma that made her mouth water. She knew she didn't actually need to eat, but the bread looked so good that she wanted it anyway. She pushed open the bakery door, the little bell above tinkling softly, and was greeted by the warm, comforting smell of freshly baked goods. Her eyes darted around the shop, taking in the neatly arranged shelves and the bustling activity behind the counter. She made her way to the display case, where an assortment of pastries and bread beckoned to her. She picked out a few items, a crusty baguette, a soft roll, and a sweet pastry, then placed them carefully onto a tray. Haziel set the tray on the counter and waited. And before long, a middle-aged man soon approached, wiping his flour-dusted hands on his apron. He had a kind face, with laugh lines edged around his eyes and a welcoming smile. Good afternoon, Anything else I can get for you today? Haziel shook her head politely. No, thank you. This will be all. Great. All of that will be 3 silver coins please. No problem, just let me. Haziel reached for her coin pouch, but her hand found only empty air. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach as she realized that her coin pouch was likely lost during her fight with Dante. She sighed and looked up at the baker with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, but it seems that I've lost my coin pouch. I'll have to return these. The baker's eyes softened. Lost it, did you? That's unfortunate. He paused, considering something. This is a bit sudden, but can you bake? Haziel blinked in surprise. I can, but I'm not very good at it. The baker's face lit up with a relieved smile. That's fine. I only need someone to help me out for the rest of the day. My usual assistant didn't come to his shift, and I'm struggling to finish some big orders. He gestured to the trays of half-prepared dough behind him. If you help me, you can have the bread you chose now, and later tonight, you can take your pick of some more bread and any leftovers. Haziel considered his offer. She tried to remember what she was supposed to be doing next. I was definitely on a mission to do something. But her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the smell of something burning. Haziel's nose twitched, the sharp odor cutting through her musings. The baker, standing nearby, let out a startled exclamation and rushed to the oven. Soon, he pulled out a tray of charred loaves, the once golden crusts now blackened and smoking. The baker's shoulders visibly slumped as he saw the now useless products. Without a moment's hesitation, Haziel stepped forward. I'll help you. The baker sighed in relief. Thank you so much, he said, extending his flour-dusted hand. I'm Charles, by the way. And you are? Haziel took his hand, giving it a firm shake. Haziel. Well, Haziel, let's get to work. We've got a lot to do. They both set to work immediately. Haziel quickly adapted to the rhythm of the bakery as Charles provided quick instructions, demonstrating how to knead dough with just the right amount of pressure, shape loaves into perfect rounds, and monitor the oven's heat to avoid further disasters. Despite her initial hesitation, Haziel discovered she had a knack for baking. Her hands moved with precision, each action measured and efficient. The chaotic kitchen transformed under their combined efforts into a well-oiled machine, the mess of flour and dough gradually becoming organized and productive. Throughout the day, they worked side by side. The bell above the door chimed softly with each customer's arrival. Haziel found herself enjoying the interactions, even taking the time to chat with every person who visited the bakery. She helped package orders, wrapping loaves in brown paper and tying them with twine. The texture of the paper was rough yet satisfying, the twine firm under her fingers. Carriages frequently pulled up in front of the bakery, and Haziel carried baskets of freshly baked goods out to the drivers, handing them over with a nod and a brief word of thanks. As the day drew to a close, they began cleaning up the shop. Haziel swept the floors while Charles wiped down the counters and stored the remaining ingredients. The bakery grew quiet, the hustle and bustle of the day replaced by a peaceful calm. Charles looked at Haziel, gratitude evident in his eyes. Thank you for everything today, Haziel. I don't know what I would have done without you. Haziel returned his smile. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed myself. Charles glanced at a basket filled with fresh bread. I've got one last delivery to make. Would you like to come with me? The lady we're delivering to always treats us with some nice tea. Haziel shrugged, a playful glint in her eyes. I've been helping you all day anyway. I don't mind finishing this last delivery. Charles grinned. Great. Let's go. They left the bakery, the evening air cool against their faces as they walked through the now quieter streets. The city had begun to wind down, the hustle and bustle fading as the lanterns cast a warm, inviting glow along the cobblestone pathways. Charles led the way to a quaint shop with a beautifully painted sign that read Frida's Florals. The sign was adorned with intricate floral designs, the colors vibrant even in the dim light. He stopped in front of the shop and knocked on the door, the sound echoing softly in the evening stillness. Moments later, the door swung open to reveal a woman with a warm smile and a cascade of grey curls framing her kind face. Her eyes sparkled with a welcoming twinkle. Charles? And you've brought a friend, she greeted. This is Haziel, Charles said. She helped me out at the bakery today. Frida's smile broadened as she extended her hand to Haziel. It's lovely to meet you, Haziel. I'm Frida. Thank you both for the bread. It's always a pleasure to see Charles, but it's even better with delicious treats. Haziel shook Frida's hand, noting the gentle strength in her grip. Thank you, Frida. Your shop is beautiful, she said, her eyes wandering around the charming interior. The shop was a riot of colors and fragrances, with flowers of every kind arranged in artful displays. Delicate petals and lush greenery filled the space, creating a serene and inviting atmosphere. But I didn't think a flower shop would also sell tea. Frida chuckled. Oh, I don't sell tea. I just enjoy making it for certain guests. It adds a personal touch to the experience. Charles grinned, leaning in conspiratorially. And her tea is the best in the city. I come here often just for that. Frida couldn't help but let out a slight laugh. Now, you two sit down while I prepare the tea, she instructed as she guided them to a cozy seating area between several vibrant floral arrangements. Haziel and Charles settled into the comfortable chairs, their soft cushions enveloping them in a welcoming embrace. As Frida bustled off to the back, Charles turned to Haziel, his expression curious and intent. So, tell me a bit about yourself. Where are you from? Haziel hesitated, her thoughts swirling like the steam rising from a forgotten cup of tea. She felt a strange emptiness, a void where her memories should have been. I don't really remember. A slight frown creased her brow as she tried to grasp at the elusive fragments of her past. I think I forgot. That's unusual. Are you sure you're all right? I think so. My mind just feels a bit foggy right now. Yet, before Charles could ask more, Frida returned with a tray bearing a teapot and delicate cups. The porcelain clinked softly as she set it down, and the fragrant steam rose in delicate curls, filling the air with a soothing aroma. Here we go, she said, handing them each a cup. Charles accepted his cup with a grateful smile. Haziel here is having some issues remembering things. Frida's eyes twinkled with amusement as she poured the tea, the liquid a rich amber color. Oh, I'm forgetful too. It must be an age thing. But don't worry, my special tea works wonders. Haziel lifted her cup, the porcelain warm against her fingers. She sipped the tea, the rich, soothing flavor spreading through her, easing the tension in her mind. This is nice. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the creak of the store doors opening. All three turned to see an inquisitorial acolyte enter, flanked by two knights in pitch-black armor. The knight's presence was imposing, their faces hidden behind dark visors. Frida's face paled, her earlier warmth replaced by worry. Is there an issue? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. The acolyte's gaze zeroed in on Haziel. Inquisitor Haziel, you are to come back to headquarters immediately, he commanded, pointing directly at her. Charles quickly stepped in front of Haziel. There must be some misunderstanding. She's done nothing wrong. This matter does not concern civilians, but should you interfere, there will be consequences. Please, I've been a proud citizen of this country for decades, I will not be. Haziel gently tapped Charles on the shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. It's okay, I'll go with them. Are you sure? Charles asked. Yes, everything will be fine. Turning to Frida and Charles, Haziel bowed her head slightly. Thank you both for everything. I won't forget your kindness, but this is farewell for now. Frida and Charles exchanged worried glances but nodded, their concern evident. Good luck, Haziel, Frida said. Stay safe, Charles added, stepping back reluctantly. Haziel walked towards the acolyte and the knights, her steps measured and deliberate. She held her head high, exuding a quiet strength and determination. As she left the shop, she steeled herself, ready to face whatever awaited her. Chapter 35 Dominance. Sera and Ermo walked through the winding corridors of the underground. Ermo's ears twitched nervously, eyes darting around as they moved deeper into the labyrinthine passages. Boss, is Alp really here? Yes, she's definitely here. Just keep looking. As they rounded a corner, Sera spotted a familiar figure partially hidden in the shadows. A beastkin woman with long, black hair stood with a tense, alert posture. She wore a simple tunic, the fabric worn but clean, and despite her unassuming attire, her presence radiated strength and resilience. Sera pointed towards the woman, I believe that's her. Ermo's breath hitched, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it might echo through the corridor. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes never leaving the woman. Alpa. The beastkin woman turned slowly, her eyes widening as they met Ermo's. Recognition dawned on her face, and she stepped out of the shadows, the tension in her posture melting into relief. Ermo. Immediately, Ermo closed the distance between them. He reached out, hands trembling as they cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing against her cheeks. Are you okay? Tears welled up in Alpa's eyes, spilling over as she nodded. I'm fine now, but what about you? Are you hurt? Ermo shook his head, a smile breaking through the tears that now streamed freely down his face. I'm okay, and I'm never letting you go again. Alpa's hands flew to cover his, her fingers tracing the contours of his strong, familiar hands. She pulled him into a tight embrace, burying her face in his shoulder as sobs racked her body. I was so scared. I thought I'd lost you forever. Ermo held her close, his own tears mingling with hers. I'm here now, and I'm glad you're here too. Sera watched them for a moment longer before stepping closer. Sorry for interrupting you two, but what do you both plan on doing now? Alpa pulled back slightly, just enough to look at Sera while still keeping a hand on Ermo's arm. Her fingers tightened around his sleeve, the fabric bunching slightly under her grip. I'll go wherever Ermo goes. Sera nodded, turning her gaze to Ermo. And what about you? Ermo's brow furrowed in thought, the weight of their future pressing heavily upon him. He sighed deeply, the sound carrying the burden of his uncertainty. I'm not sure, he admitted. His eyes flickered to Alpa, searching for strength in her presence. But, could we stay in the dungeon, boss? Indefinitely, I mean. We don't have anywhere else to go. Sera considered his request quietly in her mind. I don't really see any reason to deny his request. It gives me more hands to help with the dungeon, and Alpa could even make those succulent donuts that I saw before. Finally, Sera spoke with a decisive tone. You are free to stay, Ermo. Both of you. But you must continue to help maintain and protect the dungeon. Ermo nodded, relief washing over his features. He turned to Alpa, a questioning look in his eyes. Are you okay with that, dear? Alpa smiled softly, her hand squeezing his. I'll get by. Sera glanced around the underground corridor. For now, I need you both to stand by in another location. Alpa thought for a moment before suggesting a spot. What about the old bar in the lower level? It's quiet and usually empty. Ermo's ears perked up. Will there be more black eagles there? Alpa shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. There's actually been a lot fewer of them around lately. I think we'll be safe. Sera chuckled softly at their exchange. Very well. Head there and wait for my instructions. I'll see you both at the designated place soon. Ermo and Alpa nodded, their hands still intertwined as they began to make their way to the old bar. Once the two disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, Sera turned to a quiet corner of the underground passage. Taking a deep breath, Sera closed her eyes and concentrated. She focused on the connection she shared with Zoha, the demoness bound to her service. The air around her began to buzz, a faint hum growing louder until it became the unmistakable sound of a swarm of flies. Mistress, Zoha greeted. What do you need? Sera opened her eyes, meeting the demoness' gaze. Have there been any issues with the dungeon? None, mistress. Everything is as it should be. Good. Now, we have a new objective. With Vittorio and Vega dead, this is the perfect opportunity for me to seize control of the Black Eagles and utilize them for my purposes. What is your plan, mistress? I need your help to gather the remaining Black Eagles in one location. We must bring them together and show them that we can offer stability and leadership. Once they are assembled, I will formally seize control of the group. Zoha's smile widened, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Consider it done, mistress. Where should I gather them? Sera thought for a moment, weighing the options. The prison complex where Vittorio's corpse is, I believe it should be a floor below here, but you'll know it when you see it. I will start immediately. It won't take long to locate them and bring them there. Hours later, Sera stood in the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the prison complex. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and unwashed bodies. Vittorio's corpse hung grotesquely from the ceiling, still impaled on the icicle she had conjured, blood had frozen into dark icicles, hanging from the wound. Before her stood the remnants of the Black Eagles, around 24 members, their faces a mix of fear, confusion, and defiance. Their eyes flickered nervously between Sera and the macabre display above. Sera took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. I am Sera, and as of now, I am in charge of the Black Eagles whether you like it or not. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, the silence in the room growing heavier. I suppose you might be wondering why you should listen to me. Let me make it clear. I am the one who single-handedly took down dozens of your so-called comrades. Your friends, your allies, reduced to nothing but corpses at my feet. They dared to defy me, and they paid the price. A murmur ran through the group, the uneasy shifting of bodies and the scraping of boots against the stone floor. Sera paced around lightly as she continued speaking. I killed Vega with my own hands in his own quarters. She pointed to Vittorio's corpse, still pinned grotesquely from the ceiling. And I did the same to your leader, just like that. The room fell into a stunned silence, the remaining Black Eagles staring at Sera with a mixture of horror and awe. She took a step forward, her presence commanding and unyielding. You have two choices. You can either fall in line and serve me, or you can end up like your former leaders. The decision is yours. A murmur ran through the group, the uneasy shifting of bodies and the scraping of boots against the stone floor. A few bolder voices rose above the rest, their words tinged with anger and disbelief. One of the men stepped forward. Who do you think you are? He spat, his voice echoing off the walls. You think you can just walk in here and take over? Soon, a few others joined in voicing their dissent and hurling insults. It seemed as though a riot might break out at any moment, the simmering anger of the mercenaries threatening to boil over. Sera remained unfazed, and leaned slightly towards Zoha. Remove them. Zoha's form shimmered as her body dissolved into a swarm of flies. The swarm expanded, each fly a dark speck against the dim light of the chamber, until it completely enveloped the dissenters. Panic erupted among the Black Eagles. Their eyes widened in horror as they swung their arms wildly, trying to fend off the relentless onslaught of insects. The flies were everywhere, crawling into mouths, ears, and eyes, making every breath a struggle. Amid the chaos, the swarm began to lift the troublemakers into the air, their bodies flailing helplessly. In a horrifying display, the swarm consumed them alive, tearing at flesh with a ferocity that defied nature. Within moments, the screaming ceased, replaced by an eerie silence as the swarm retreated, leaving nothing but a few blood-stained scraps of clothing in their wake. The remaining Black Eagles stood frozen, faces pale and eyes wide with shock. Their defiance had been utterly quashed, replaced by a palpable fear that hung in the air. Meanwhile, Zoha reformed beside Sera, her eyes gleaming with a faint smile playing on her lips. Sera stepped forward and spoke again. Does anyone else have any complaints? The room remained silent, the only sound the faint, lingering buzz of a stray fly. Sera's gaze swept over the group, each member avoiding her eyes. Finally. Now, all I need to do is to break them in a little bit more. Satisfied with the lack of response, Sera took a step back. Form lines and clean this area. I want every inch of this place spotless. The Black Eagles hesitated for a moment, their eyes flicking nervously between each other. There wasn't a single piece of cleaning equipment nearby. Move! Sera barked, her voice slicing through their hesitation like a whip. Instantly, they scrambled into action, their movements frantic and disjointed. They snatched up rags, discarded cloths, and any scrap of material they could find. Their desperation was palpable, each of them driven by a mixture of urgency and dread, their eyes constantly darting towards Sera and Zoha, fearful of provoking either of them. As they scoured the chamber for anything useful, their search grew increasingly desperate. They tore at their own clothing, ripping off sleeves and hems to create makeshift cleaning tools. Sweat beaded on their brows as they used their bare hands to scrub the stone floor, the rough texture scraping their skin raw. Sort these stones by size and color, Sera demanded next, pointing at a chaotic pile of rocks and rubble. The Black Eagles at each other with bewildered expressions. The absurdity of the task hung in the air, but Sera's piercing gaze left them no choice. Reluctantly, they bent down, picking through the debris with trembling hands. Their fingers bled as they sorted the stones, the jagged edges cutting into their flesh. Each stone was meticulously examined and placed into piles, the sound of clattering rocks filling the chamber. The lack of proper equipment made the task torturous, their hands quickly becoming numb. Now stack them in the shape of a pyramid, Sera commanded. Once again, the Black Eagles exchanged confused, weary glances but obeyed nonetheless. Their hands moved with mechanical precision, placing each stone on top of another, forming an ever-growing pyramid. But, one lean man carried out each task without saying a word and without any sign of complaint. He sorted the stones quickly, stacking them precisely as instructed. Sera noted his diligence and dedication. What's your name? She asked, stepping closer to the man. Kiran, ma'am, he replied, standing at attention. Sera nodded approvingly. Kiran, you have followed my orders without question. From this moment on, you are a group leader. You will be assigned people to work under you. Kiran's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly masked it with a nod. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. The other mercenaries watched the promotion unfold, eyes flickering with envy. Subtle shifts in their expressions betrayed their thoughts, clenched jaws, narrowed eyes, and twitching fingers. The raw emotions simmered beneath the surface, their hesitations melting away as they started to carry out Sera's commands with a newfound enthusiasm. Move those crates to the other side of the room, Sera continued, pointing to a stack of heavy wooden boxes. The crates were old and worn, their surfaces marred by countless scratches and scuffs, the wood darkened by years of use. The mercenaries hurried to comply, their movements now more coordinated and efficient, muscles straining as they lifted the cumbersome loads. Yet, soon, Zoha leaned in close to Sera, her breath warm against Sera's ear as she whispered softly, Mistress, is this really a good idea? These tasks seem trivial. Sera's eyes remained fixed on the black eagles as they labored. I know, she replied quietly. I won't get the best of the best this way, but right now, I'm more concerned with loyalty. These tasks are a test of their willingness to follow orders without question. Sera continued her meticulous process of observing and assigning tasks, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She evaluated each mercenary's performance with a keen intensity, noting every falter and hesitation. One by one, she tested their obedience and determination, each task deliberately designed to challenge their willingness to comply. As the mercenaries grew more accustomed to Sera's commands, a second candidate emerged. Myra, a tall, muscular woman with short cropped hair, stepped up with quiet efficiency. You, Sera called out, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning towards Myra. You are now a group leader. Stand by for further instructions. Myra straightened. Yes, ma'am, she replied crisply, stepping aside to join Kiran. Sera continued her assessment, her eyes scanning the remaining mercenaries. Another promising individual, a wiry man with quick reflexes named Jarek, distinguished himself through his resourcefulness and ability to anticipate needs before being told. Jarek, Sera said, her voice commanding attention. You are the third group leader. Stand by with the others. Jarek nodded before joining Kiran and Myra. The group of Black Eagles watched with growing respect and wariness, understanding that their future in the organization depended on their performance. Finally, a young woman named Ilara caught Sera's attention. Despite her slight frame, Ilara moved with a quiet grace and displayed a keen intelligence in her tasks. Ilara, Sera called out, her voice firm. You are the fourth group leader. Stand by with the others. Ilara's eyes widened with surprise but quickly regained their focus. Thank you, ma'am, she said, joining the other leaders. Sera stepped back, her gaze sweeping over the assembled mercenaries. You have proven your loyalty through your actions today. I expect the same level of dedication moving forward. For now, you are dismissed. The Black Eagles nodded before they filed out of the room, leaving the four new group leaders standing together, awaiting further instructions. Sera watched as the four newly appointed group leaders, Kiran, Myra, Jarek, and Ilara, stood at attention. The cold atmosphere of the prison complex seemed to weigh heavily on their shoulders, but they maintained their composure. Now, I need to know if any of you have information regarding Vittorio's experiments. Sera said. The leaders exchanged uncertain glances until Kiran stepped forward. Ma'am, we don't know much about Vittorio's experiments. He was always secretive about his work. Only Vega knew the full extent of what he was doing. Sera's expression hardened as she sighed involuntarily. Regret flickered briefly in her mind as she recalled the moment she killed Vega. If only I'd kept him alive a bit longer. But she quickly pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. We need to find Vittorio's research. Does anyone know where he kept it? Kiran nodded. I do, ma'am. I can take you there. I also know my way around the Black Eagles facilities if you need a tour. Sera's eyes narrowed as she appraised Kiran. His initiative and knowledge were precisely what she needed. Thank you, Kiran. Your help will be invaluable. Then, Sera turned to face Zoha. Watch over the other leaders. They should stand by for now. As you wish, mistress. Chapter 36 Sightseeing. Sera followed Kiran until they arrived at a massive, iron-bound door. The dark wood was scarred and weathered, marked by years of use. Heavy iron bands crossed the door with rusted edges. "This is Vito's study," Kiran said quietly. Only he knew where the keys were kept. "I've never seen anyone else open it." Sera's eyes narrowed as she studied the door. "Step aside." As Kiran stepped back, Sera extended her hand to touch the handle. A faint, icy mist emanated from her fingertips, the metal quickly frosting over as her magic took hold. The frost spread, creeping over the handle and the surrounding wood. Then, Sera clenched her hand, and the frozen handle shattered into countless glittering shards, scattering across the stone floor. She pushed the door open with a steady hand, the heavy wood creaking as it swung inward. As Sera stepped into the study, her gaze immediately fell upon the shelves lining the walls. They were crammed with an eclectic collection of books and scrolls, their spines cracked and faded with age. The shelves themselves were old, the wood darkened by years of use and the weight of their precious burdens. In the center of the room stood a large, cluttered desk. The surface was an overwhelming array of notes, documents, and charts, each one bearing Vito's spidery handwriting. The ink varied in hue, from fresh black to faded brown, indicating years of relentless work. Diagrams and illustrations filled the pages, detailing complex alchemical processes and arcane theories. That fool was dedicated, if nothing else. Sera's eyes roved over the shelves and the cluttered desk. She turned to Kiran, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "So, what do you think?" Kiran shook his head. "Not sure what to think, ma'am. Vito always kept this place locked up tight. Only he knew where the keys were kept." Sera raised an eyebrow, her fingers trailing over a particularly old tome with a cracked leather cover. "Really? And you never tried to sneak in? No curiosity about what your boss was up to?" Kiran chuckled nervously. "I think everyone was curious, but none of us were brave or foolish enough to cross Vito. He had a way of discouraging that kind of thing." "Fair enough," Sera mused, flipping open the tome to reveal pages filled with complex alchemical symbols and handwritten notes. She sifted through the documents on the desk, her keen eyes scanning the spidery handwriting and intricate diagrams. One set of notes caught her attention, detailing the anatomical structure of beastkin shifters. "Did you know that Vito was experimenting on beastkin shifters?" Kiran's eyes widened in surprise. "Experimenting? I thought he was just interested in them because they could be sold for a lot of money. I never imagined he was doing this." "Well, now you know," Sera said, setting the parchment back on the desk. She looked around the room once more, her mind already cataloguing the information she had found and planning her next steps. "I'll return to this office later to go through everything more thoroughly." Sera turned to Kiran, her eyes sharp and focused. "For now, can you take me to where the Black Eagles make their potions? I'd like to see what resources we have at our disposal." Kiran nodded, snapping out of his thoughts. "Of course, ma'am. Follow me." They left the study, the heavy door creaking shut behind them. As they walked through the labyrinthine corridors of the underground complex, Sera couldn't help but ponder the implications of Vittorio's experiments. "Though I abhor his research, it wouldn't surprise me if there's at least some useful information buried in the study." Soon, the air grew warmer as they approached a section of the complex that was well lit and bustling with activity. The sound of bubbling liquids and the faint smell of herbs and chemicals filled the air as the two approached another door. Kiran knocked firmly, and after a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a human woman clad in a stained, worn alchemist's coat. Her hair was a tousled mess, strands escaping from a loose bun, as well dark circles under her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. She greeted Kiran with an impassive look, her gaze drifting over Sera with mild curiosity. "Desmunda," Kiran sighed. "This is Sera, our new boss." The alchemist's eyes flicked back to Kiran, then to Sera. Her eyes were a deep, piercing blue, though dulled by fatigue. "Welcome," she said flatly, her tone devoid of enthusiasm. Without waiting for a response, she turned back to her work, her hands deftly mixing ingredients in a bubbling cauldron. Kiran panicked, sweat beading down his forehead as he expected a more respectful greeting. "Desmunda, I think you should show some more respect, for your sake." Sera chuckled softly. "It's fine, I'll make an exception for the alchemist." She turned to Desmunda with a steady gaze. "Do you mind if I have a look around?" The weary alchemist glanced up from her work, her expression still impassive. "Feel free to look, as long as you don't disturb my work." Sera nodded and stepped into the room, which had almost a dozen other alchemists bustling about, tending to their concoctions. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with jars of herbs, vials of brightly colored liquids, and strange, unidentifiable artifacts. Sera's eyes were drawn to a large table in the center of the room, covered in an array of alchemical tools. Mortars and pestles, alembics, and retorts lay scattered about, some still in use, others abandoned mid-process. She moved closer, fingers trailing over the smooth, cool surfaces of the glassware. "Impressive setup," Sera said, her eyes scanning the room. Though Desmunda continued her work, her lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I've been doing this for a good while. The Black Eagles gave me what I asked for as long as I kept making potions." Sera watched Desmunda deftly measure a glowing green liquid into a vial. "What kinds of potions do you produce here?" Desmunda didn't pause in her work. "Mostly healing potions, strength enhancers, and various elixirs for stamina and speed. We also dabble in some more specialized brews when the demand calls for it." "And how often do you work with rare herbs like Viper Shade and Ether Wisp?" Desmunda glanced up, her expression turning thoughtful as she began to grind a cluster of dried leaves in a mortar. "Viper Shade and Ether Wisp are among the rarer ingredients we use. They're essential for some of our most powerful potions, but they're hard to come by. We usually reserve them for high-paying clients or critical situations." "How much of these rare herbs do you use?" "Not as much as we'd like," she admitted. "The demand for potions has been so high that we've had to dilute our supplies just to keep up. We used to make pure brews, but now we often blend them with more common ingredients to stretch our stock." Sera noted the subtle frustration in Desmunda's tone, understanding the challenges of balancing quality and quantity. "Do you find that diluting the potions affects their effectiveness significantly?" "Unfortunately, yes. Diluting the ingredients means the potions aren't as potent as they should be. We have to compensate by increasing the dosage, which isn't always practical. It's a compromise, but it's the only way to meet the demand without running out of resources entirely. It seems like a delicate balance to maintain." "Do you have any issues with supply chains?" Desmunda shook her head as she stirred the contents of the cauldron. "Supply chains are steady, but the herbs are still rare and expensive. We have to be cautious about how we use them, and sometimes we have to make tough decisions about which potions get priority." Sera watched as Desmunda carefully decanted the potion into a row of waiting vials, each one glowing faintly with magical energy. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Desmunda nodded, a hint of pride in her weary eyes. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Satisfied with the information, Sera turned back to Kiran, who had been observing quietly. "I have plans for Desmunda and the rest of the alchemists, but I think I've seen enough for now." As they exited the alchemy lab, Kiran glanced at Sera, curiosity in his eyes. "Where would you like to go next, ma'am?" Sera considered for a moment, her thoughts returning to the empty prison area they had passed earlier. "This might be sudden, but I'm curious as to why the prison area from before was empty. We transferred a lot of prisoners a week ago. They were sold off, and we're also renovating the area. So, where are the other prisoners located now?" "We have another prison not too far from here, I can take you there." Eventually, they reached a large iron door, its surface marred with age and reinforced with heavy bolts. Kiran produced a heavy iron key from his belt, then used it to unlock the door before pushing it open, the hinges groaning slightly in protest. As they stepped inside, the sound of murmurs and shuffling feet greeted them. The new prison complex was a world unto itself. Rows of cells lined the walls, each one occupied by a variety of prisoners. The scent of damp stone and unwashed bodies permeated the air, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Sera's sharp eyes quickly assessed the prisoners. Beastkin of various forms huddled in their cells. Interspersed among them were adventurers, their armor and gear marking them as such. She walked slowly down the central aisle, noting the conditions and the demeanor of the prisoners. The Beastkin looked up at her approach, their expressions a mix of fear and hopelessness, as if they had long given up on escape. In contrast, the adventurers met her gaze with hard stares, their spirits unbroken despite their captivity. "I'll stave off the Beastkin for now, the adventurers should do just fine." "Interesting," Sera said out loud, pausing in front of a cell that held a particularly grizzled adventurer. His beard was matted, his eyes sharp with intelligence and defiance. She could see the weariness in his posture, but also a spark of determination that had not been extinguished. She turned to Kiran. "I see you've been busy." Kiran nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We capture adventurers who poke their noses where they shouldn't be or if they owe us too much money. As for the beastkin, they are often caught during raids. We keep them locked up until we decide what to do with them. Sera nodded thoughtfully, her mind already working through the possibilities. Kiran, I want to select a few prisoners, including the adventurers, and have them delivered to my dungeon. Zoha can assist you with the directions later. Kiran inclined his head respectfully. Of course, ma'am. Which ones do you wish to choose? Sera walked slowly down the row of cells, scrutinizing each prisoner in turn. She stopped in front of a cell holding a young man with a scar slashing across his cheek and a hardened expression. It's likely that the Black Eagles won't be able to transport every single prisoner here into the dungeon, so, I'll pick the best out of the bunch by assigning them scores out of 10. Sera's mind quickly assessed him: lean build, quick reflexes, possibly a skilled scout. He doesn't appear to be too impressive, but not terribly mediocre either. I'll assign him a score of 5 out of 10 for now. This one, what's his rank? Kiran consulted a small, well-worn ledger he carried. D rank, ma'am. Sera nodded, then moved on to the next cell, her eyes never missing a detail. She evaluated each adventurer with a critical eye, noting their physical attributes, demeanor, and potential utility. I'll refrain from choosing Beastkin for now, out of concern for Ermo and Alpa's loyalty. This one here doesn't look half bad, Sera said, indicating a tall, muscular woman with a fierce gaze and a confident stance. The Elder Dryad noted her strength and the aura of leadership about her. Not bad, 7 out of 10. Kiran checked his ledger again. C rank, ma'am. She led a small group of adventurers deep into the dungeon before we captured her. Sera nodded approvingly. She will be useful. Add her to the list. As they continued through the cells, Sera made swift but thorough evaluations. A wiry man with quick reflexes, score of 7. Another, a young woman with a slight frame but intelligent eyes, score of 5. She paused in front of a final cell, where a particularly defiant adventurer glared at her with intense hatred. His spirit intrigued her. She noted his defiant stance, the fire in his eyes, and the potential for both leadership and trouble. There's potential in him, 8 out of 10. This one, she said, intrigued by his fierce spirit. What's his story? Kiran's expression darkened slightly. He's a C rank. We caught him attempting to free other prisoners. He's been nothing but trouble since we brought him in. Sera smiled faintly, a glint of amusement in her eyes. A rebel with spirit. I'll take him. With her selections made, Sera turned back to Kiran. Put these prisoners on whatever transports you have immediately. And if you have or are able to acquire an additional carriage, prepare it immediately as well. Kiran bowed slightly. Understood, ma'am. I will see to it personally. Chapter 37 You Shall Not Deceive. Sera made her way through the winding corridors of the underground. The damp, cool air clung to her skin, and the faint echo of her footsteps bounced off the stone walls. As she approached the old bar on the lower level, the low murmur of voices faded away, leaving an expectant silence. Pushing open the creaky wooden door, Sera stepped inside. The bar was empty this time, devoid of its usual patrons. The rough-hewn table at the center of the room was marred with scratches and gouges while shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty bottles, their labels faded but still legible. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of stale ale, evoking a sense of nostalgia rather than neglect. Ermo and Alpa sat close together at the central table, heads bent in earnest conversation. Ermo's ears twitched as he listened intently, his eyes fixed on Alpa's expressive face. Her long black hair fell like a curtain, partially obscuring her features but failing to hide the intensity of her words. When Sera moved closer, Ermo's ears perked up even more. His eyes lit up as he waved her over with a broad smile. Boss, over here. Sera returned his wave with a smile of her own. She pulled out a chair, the wooden legs scraping softly against the floor, and sat down with an ease that belied her usual command. How are you two holding up? Alpa chuckled softly. Better now that we're together. Sera leaned back in her chair, studying Alpa with a keen eye. You've had quite the journey then. What have your experiences been like with the Black Eagles? Alpa sighed, running a hand through her hair. They're a ruthless bunch. I don't really want to talk about it if I'm honest. That's fair enough, apologies for asking. No, it's fine. For a moment, an awkward silence swept through the table. But eventually, Alpa looked at Sera, with eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. You know, I'm curious, what are you planning to do now that you're the boss of the Black Eagles? Sera's expression hardened slightly, jaw tightening as she spoke. In truth, I don't plan on changing too much. Yet, when she saw the flicker of disappointment in Ermo's and Alpa's eyes, a subtle drooping of their shoulders and a brief, shared look of unease, she pivoted her words immediately, but I will at least put a stop to the Black Eagles hurting Beastkin. That much I can promise. Ermo's ears twitched, and he exchanged a glance with Alpa, whose tense posture softened. If that's the case, what's your ultimate goal? Sera leaned back, fingers lightly tracing the edge of the rough-hewn table. You might not believe me until you reach my dungeon. It's different from what you might expect. Ermo nodded. It's best if you see it for yourself. The boss's dungeon is definitely very unique. But soon, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps. The rhythmic thud grew louder, and a burly man with a thick mustache emerged from the shadows. He approached Sera with a slight bow, respect evident in his demeanor. The carriage and wagon filled with prisoners are ready, boss. Sera thanked the Black Eagle member with a curt nod. Thank you. You're dismissed. The man bowed again before turning and walking away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Then, Sera turned her attention back to Ermo and Alpa. Apologies, but I need you both to wait a bit longer while I finish a few things. Ermo and Alpa exchanged glances, but nodded in understanding. The lines of tension on their faces eased slightly. Sera gave them a reassuring smile before turning towards the exit and making her way outside. She walked to a quiet corner, a secluded nook filled with disused crates and barrels stacked haphazardly. Sera paused, closing her eyes and steadying her breath. She focused her thoughts solely on summoning Zoha, pushing away all other distractions. The air around her shifted as a buzzing sound filled the air. A moment later, Zoha materialized, her form emerging gracefully from the shimmering air. The demoness stood tall and elegant, eyes gleaming with curiosity and a hint of mischief as they settled on Sera. Mistress, Zoha said, bowing her head slightly in deference. Zoha, I need you to speak with Kiran and tell him to keep an eye on the Black Eagles. Once you've done that, return to the dungeon immediately. Sera instructed. The demoness nodded at first, but a flicker of hesitation crossed her features. Her brow furrowed slightly as she looked at Sera. Understood, but do you really trust the Black Eagles, mistress? Not entirely, but I don't think they'll be a problem for now. After a brief pause, Zoha nodded again. Understood, mistress. With that, she dissolved into a swarm of flies. The transformation was seamless, the edges of her silhouette blurring as the tiny creatures emerged and then dispersed into the shadows with a soft, buzzing hum. Sera watched until the last of the flies vanished, leaving the air still and silent once more. After gathering her thoughts, she turned and made her way back to the bar. After pushing open the doors, Sera's eyes immediately found Ermo and Alpa's table. Stepping forward, her bare feet made soft, almost silent contact with the cool wooden floor as she approached their table and called out to the couple. Are you two ready to leave? I'm good to go. Alpa said. But Ermo suddenly slapped his forehead. Shit, how could I forget about Faye? Alpa turned to Ermo, evidently surprised. Faye? How is she even here? Is she okay? She was probably supposed to be taken here with the rest of us, but she's now roaming the slums on her own. Ermo, how could you leave a little girl alone in a place like this? Before Ermo could respond, Sera raised a hand. I made sure the girl's safe, but you're both free to fetch her before we head to the dungeon. Sera stepped off the carriage, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings near the forest edge that concealed her dungeon's entrance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the towering trees, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The air was thick with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil, a stark contrast to the underground labyrinth they had just left. Behind her, Ermo descended from the carriage, his strong arms reaching up to help Alpa down. Alpa's eyes met his with a soft smile of gratitude before she turned to lift Faye from the carriage. The young girl, with her bright eyes and uncontained energy, bounded to the ground with a grin. Thanks, Uncle Ermo. Faye chirped, her excitement palpable as she glanced around the forest. Ermo chuckled, his ears twitching. No problem, Faye. Enjoying the view? Faye nodded vigorously. It's beautiful. Auntie Alpa, do you think there are fairies in these woods? Alpa ruffled Faye's hair affectionately. Maybe, Faye. This forest has a lot of secrets. You never know what you might find. Faye's eyes widened with wonder. I hope we see one. Uncle Ermo, do you think we will? Ermo laughed softly. Maybe, but remember, we're here to get you to safety first. Exploring can come later. Their banter was interrupted by the rhythmic clatter of hooves against the gravel road, announcing the arrival of another horse-drawn wagon. The wooden wheels creaked under the weight of the captured adventurers, each one bound and looking resigned to their fate. The wagon drew to a halt, and the coachman tipped his hat to Sera, his expression weary but respectful. A few members of the Black Eagles moved out as they escorted the adventurers out of the wagon. The prisoners were lined up, eyes darting around trying to understand what exactly was going on. After thanking and then dismissing the coachman, Sera turned to the Black Eagle members nearby. Help escort the prisoners and follow me. The Black Eagles nodded before falling into step behind her. Sera led the group onward while Ermo and Alpa flanked her, while Faye ran and skipped beside them. As they approached the entrance of Sera's dungeon, Alpa's eyes widened in astonishment as she saw the thick roots that blocked the way. She couldn't help but voice her surprise. I've definitely never seen anything like this before, she said, reaching out tentatively to touch the roots. Faye mimicked Alpa's actions, her small hands exploring the texture of the roots. Why are they so big? Sera glanced at them both. Once we're inside, you'll have plenty of time to explore. For now, let's head in. As if responding to her words, the roots began to shift and unfurl, gradually receding to reveal the entrance. Sera led the group deeper into the dungeon, the air growing cooler and the light dimming as they ventured further into the labyrinthine passages. After several twists and turns, they reached a familiar magic circle etched into the ground. Sera turned to the Black Eagles again. Take the prisoners and step into the circle first. The Black Eagles bowed their heads lightly before guiding the captives into the magic circle. The adventurers, though bound and subdued, couldn't conceal their curiosity and trepidation as their eyes darted around the chamber, wide with uncertainty and fear. Sera then faced Ermo. I'll go ahead first. You're free to show Alpa and Faye around if you wish. Got it, boss. Ermo said. With a final nod, Sera stepped into the circle. The moment her bare foot touched the center, the runes flared brightly, illuminating the chamber with a dazzling light. In an instant, she, the Black Eagles, and the prisoners were enveloped in a flash of light. Once they arrived at the mystic forest, Sera guided the group through the dense foliage as they moved to the entrance to the spirit tree's chamber, still covered in thick, gnarled roots that twisted and intertwined. Sera took a deep breath before taking a step forward. The roots sensed her presence and pared away slowly, recognizing her authority. They twisted and unfurled, revealing glimpses of the chamber within. Sera stepped forward, feeling the cool, smooth ground beneath her bare feet. Each step echoed softly in the hushed chamber, the air thick with an ancient, almost tangible power. She paused just inside the entrance, turning back to face the Black Eagles. Escort the prisoners inside, one by one, now. The Black Eagles responded with a unified nod. One by one, the prisoners went into the spirit tree's chamber, each of them flinching slightly as the roots whispered shut behind them with a soft rustling sound. Once the last prisoner had been ushered into the chamber and the roots had closed behind them, Sera addressed the Black Eagles once more. Keep watch. The Black Eagles responded affirmatively as they spread out to form a loose semicircle around the prisoners. Their postures were alert, ready to react to any potential threat. The prisoners, though subdued, couldn't help but cast furtive glances around the chamber, the weight of their new surroundings settling heavily upon them. Sera approached the first prisoner and placed a hand on the back of his neck. The prisoner flinched, but before he could react further, a wave of frost spread from Sera's touch, freezing his neck solid. His eyes widened in terror, his last breath visible in the cold air before he fell lifeless to the ground. The Black Eagles exchanged uneasy glances, their initial confidence giving way to a growing sense of dread. Sera moved to the next prisoner, repeating the process with the same ruthless efficiency. As she continued, the Black Eagle members grew more and more nervous, their discomfort palpable. They shifted on their feet, their eyes flickering between Sera and the increasingly large number of frozen bodies. Still, none of them dared to say anything. When Sera was finished with the last prisoner, she turned to the Black Eagles. Thank you for your assistance. You may wait outside. The Black Eagles nodded quickly and retreated into the forest, their faces pale and tense. Sera watched them go until they were out of sight. Now, Sera stood alone before the spirit tree. She slowly turned to face it, tracing the patterns etched into its trunk. The air around her felt heavy, as though the forest itself held its breath in anticipation. The roots of the tree beneath her feet pulsed faintly, a slow, rhythmic throb that responded to her presence like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. She took a deep breath as she recalled Amaryllis's words about the spirit tree. Sera tried to clear her mind, repeating a mantra in the hopes it will become her shield for what was to come. Empty my mind, stay calm, everything will be fine. Her jaw tightened as she forced herself to relax, though every fiber of her being screamed to flee. The tension in her muscles was almost unbearable. Her breaths were measured and painfully slow, it was her way of fighting against the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. When her mind steadied, her antlers began to grow once more, dark and ominous as they sprouted from her forehead. The spirit tree's roots responded in kind, slowly creeping up her back with an almost tender touch. At first, the sensation was soothing, comforting, and warm. The roots pulsed with an energy that was both familiar and reassuring, syncing seamlessly with her own heartbeat. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that everything would be all right. But that moment was fleeting. A sharp, electric jolt surged through her, cutting through the calm like a blade. The spirit tree's notification echoed in her mind, cold and clinical. Administrator corruption detected, probe initiated. Her eyes shot open as a searing pain exploded from the point where the roots intertwined with her spine. It was as if molten metal had been poured into her veins, spreading outward from her back with relentless intensity. Sera gasped, breath catching in her throat as her body convulsed. With a strangled cry, Sera felt something thick and unnatural rise in her throat. She tried to swallow it down, but her body betrayed her, forcing her to expel the substance. She doubled over, coughing violently as a stream of viscous black sap spewed from her mouth, splattering onto the ground in a grotesque display. Her vision blurred as the agony overwhelmed her, knees buckling as she fought to stay upright. The world around her swayed, the once sturdy ground beneath her feet now feeling like shifting sands. Desperation clawed at the edges of her mind, the primal need to survive warring with the overwhelming urge to surrender to the pain. She knew she had to resist, to push back against the spirit tree's probing, but collecting her thoughts felt impossible. Need, focus. The words echoed in her mind, but they felt distant, almost unattainable as the toll of the spirit tree's assault continued to ravage her body. As the seconds ticked by, Sera's world became darker, and darker. Chapter 38 Cold World. In a split second, Sera quickly thought of something to distract her mind: desserts. She latched onto the idea, clinging to it like a lifeline. Desserts. Cakes. Pies. Sugary confections. She forced herself to focus on the sweet imagery, picturing elaborate pastries and delicate sweets. She chanted the words in her mind, repeating them over and over. Cakes, pastries, cookies. Cakes, pastries, cookies. The pain surged again, another wave crashing through her. More black sap dribbled from her lips, her body shuddering with the effort to stay upright. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms as she fought to maintain the chant. Cakes, pastries, cookies. Fortunately, the pain began to ebb, the intensity lessening with each passing moment. Sera continued her chant, her mind stubbornly clinging to the sugary thoughts. The spirit tree's probing felt less invasive, the root's grip on her loosening. The connection began to stabilize, the searing pain reducing to a dull ache. Finally, another notification flashed in her mind. Administrator is stable, normal operations may continue. Sera gasped in relief, the tension draining from her body. She swayed on her feet, exhaustion washing over her. She wiped the black sap from her lips, her breathing ragged but steady. By the dead gods, I can't believe that actually worked. The dull ache in Sera's back was a constant reminder of the spirit tree's probing. Her hand brushed against the rough bark, feeling the gritty texture beneath her fingertips. She exhaled slowly, focusing her mind on the task at hand. Everything's fine, proceed as normal. Initiate experience extraction please. Experience extraction initiated. The spirit tree's roots surged forward, writhing across the ground to seek out the lifeless bodies scattered around the chamber. As they found their targets, the roots coiled around the corpses, tight like a vice closing with immense force. Before long, the roots dug into the dead bodies. The roots pulsed with energy, their surfaces glowing with a vibrant green hue that intensified with each beat. Slowly, the roots extracted the essence from the bodies, drawing out shimmering motes of mana. They floated upward, a slow and graceful ascent, gathering around Sera in a swirling, luminescent dance. The air grew thick with the energy, and Sera felt it seep into her, a rejuvenating force that soothed the ache in her back and filled her with renewed vigor. The motes of mana floated upwards, coalescing into a dense cloud above the spirit tree. The bodies of the prisoners rapidly disintegrated, their forms breaking down into fine particles that were absorbed by the roots. As the last of the bodies were consumed, a notification flashed in Sera's front of her eyes. Experience extraction complete. Core experience updated to 12,000. Rank up requirement from rank 3 to rank 4, 10,000 experience. Initiate rank up sequence? Without hesitation, Sera spoke her desire, yes please. Rank up sequence initiated, please wait. The air around Sera thrummed with energy, the ground beneath her feet vibrating in resonance. With each passing second, the spirit tree expanded. Its trunk thickened and elongated, the gnarled bark shifting and creaking as it grew taller. Before long, the tree went from being as tall as her hips to the point it matched her own height. Rank up sequence complete. Displaying dungeon status. Core rank, 4. Core experience, 2000. Dungeon boss, Sera. Number of floors, 3. Mana, 400/800, 400 currently used for monster maintenance. Monsters, 29. New features unlocked, new terrain option, new floor construction, enhanced experience extraction. Enhanced experience extraction sounded promising, likely allowing her to draw even more power from the adventurers and monsters that fell within her domain. Perhaps it involved a more efficient conversion process, resulting in greater mana or experience gains. But more importantly, I can finally construct new floors in the dungeon. She summoned the system interface with a thought, her curiosity piqued. A notification appeared, explaining the mechanics of floor construction. Displaying floor construction details. Constructing a new floor requires core experience. The cost of constructing a new floor increases with each additional floor. How much does it cost to construct a new floor now? She asked aloud, though she already knew the answer. The current cost is 1000 core experience. Would you like to construct a new floor? Yes, she affirmed without hesitation. A new floor has been chosen as the target of terrain alteration. Please review the available terrain options below. 1 basic theme, default option, unique passive, none. 2 stone maze, rank 2 option, unique passive, minor bonus to adventurer's fear. 3 glow moss cavern, rank 3 option, unique passive, slight possibility that glimmer cap mushrooms will sporadically emerge over time. 4 white forest, rank 4 option, unique passive, this terrain option comes with 4 frost banshees. These frost banshees are self-sustaining and do not require mana for maintenance. They have a respawn time of 12 hours, restriction, this terrain can be applied to only 1 out of every 4 floors in the dungeon. The white forest stood out the most. The inclusion of frost banshees that did not require mana to sustain was particularly appealing. These spirits would enhance her dungeon's defenses without draining her resources, making them a valuable asset. The restriction is annoying, but it should become more manageable in the future once the dungeon has more floors. I choose the white forest, she decided. Where would you like to place the new floor? Just above this one, she said. The ground beneath Sera's feet trembled, growing stronger with each passing second. Sera reached out and grasped the rough stone wall beside her, its cool surface grounding her amidst the tumult. She pressed her palm against the wall, feeling the solid texture beneath her fingers. For a moment, she closed her eyes, focusing on the connection between her and the spirit tree. The vibrations coursed through her body, resonating with the energy of the roots as they delved deeper into the subterranean depths. Gradually, the tremors subsided, leaving a profound stillness as Sera opened her eyes again. New floor construction complete. White forest terrain successfully implemented. Frost banshees have been deployed. Satisfied with the new floor's completion, Sera decided to review the enhanced experience extraction next. She summoned the system interface once more, curious to understand the new capabilities. Displaying enhanced experience extraction details. Experience extraction will now automatically commence whenever a suitable target dies within the dungeon. Automatic extraction would ensure that no potential power source went to waste, making her dungeon more self-sufficient and efficient. She could now focus on other tasks, confident that the dungeon could now function somewhat reasonably if she were absent. Her thoughts drifted to the possibilities this enhancement brought. The seamless extraction of experience from fallen enemies would mean a constant influx of power, allowing her to grow stronger without having to micromanage the process. This would free her up to strategize and expand her influence further, pushing the boundaries of what her dungeon could achieve. Satisfied with this understanding, Sera decided to check her own profile next. Name, Sera. Species, Elder Dryad. Access privilege, Administrator. Level, 300. Magic, 300, rating, S. Magic resistance, 300, rating, S. Physical defense, 100, rating, C. Strength, 50, rating, E. Speed, 150, rating, B. Vitality, 300, rating, S. Overall challenge rating, S. Alert, Level 3 Winter Path Progression ability available. Processing Level 3 Winter Path Progression reward. New Winter Path ability unlocked, Glacial Aegis. Description: upon detecting an incoming attack, an ice shield proportional to the threat level automatically manifests to intercept the attack. Additionally, the user can enhance the shield's durability through focused concentration. Restriction: successive activations of Glacial Aegis result in progressively diminished shield strength. Sera paused as she considered the implications of the ability. I believe I used this ability before when I was still borrowing Amaryllis's strength. If it's as strong as it was then, this ability will be a useful addition to my arsenal. Eager to test it out, she detached herself from the spirit tree, the roots unwinding from her form with gentle reluctance. However, before leaving the chamber, Sera turned back to look at the spirit tree. Her relationship with the tree had changed profoundly ever since Winter had revealed the truth to her. What once felt like an unquestioning bond was now corrupted with doubt. The roots stirred slightly, as if sensing her contemplation, prompting her to turn away and exit the chamber quickly. When she left the spirit tree's chamber, Sera saw Ermo and Alpa walking nearby, framed by the towering trees. Faye was with them, her small figure darting around energetically, exploring her surroundings with boundless curiosity. Ermo's animated gestures highlighted his enthusiasm as he showed off the thornlings to Alpa and Faye. The tiny creatures bounced excitedly on spindly legs, scurrying around with quick, erratic movements that were oddly coordinated. Their tiny eyes sparkled with mischief as they explored the ground. Brave and Valor still played along with the rest of their kind, though they had a hard time not crashing into their friends due to their larger size. Sera chuckled a bit as she approached the group. How are you all finding the dungeon so far? Ermo's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. He turned to face her, a broad grin spreading across his face. Hey boss, Alpa's been quite fond of the thornlings, and Faye's been having a blast too. The beastkin woman nodded enthusiastically. They're fascinating. I've never seen anything like them before. They're quite adorable, aren't they? Sera said, her eyes following a particularly bold thornling that had ventured closer to her feet. Nicer than I thought too, Alpa said with a light chuckle. Faye knelt down to get a closer look at the thornlings, her eyes wide with delight. Uncle Ermo, Auntie Alpa, look at this one. It's so brave. Ermo laughed softly. That's brave. And the bigger one over there is Valor. They're always up to something. Sera chuckled lightly. If there's anything you all need, just let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Alpa looked at Sera with a thoughtful expression, brows slightly furrowed as if pondering something important. This might be sudden, but would it be alright if me and Ermo build a proper house here in the dungeon? Sera tilted her head, intrigued. I don't mind at all. But why didn't Ermo ever want to build one before? I just didn't really think of it, Ermo admitted, scratching the back of his head. But now that Alpa wants a house, I want to help her build one. Are we going to have a house here, Auntie Alpa? Faye asked. Alpa smiled down at the young girl. Of course, Faye. You can help us decorate it too. Sera nodded. I can help you build a basic living space and some furniture, but you two are free to decorate and furnish it however you wish. Thank you, boss. That means a lot to us, Ermo said. Let's find a suitable spot. Ermo, Alpa, Faye, follow me. The Elder Dryad led the group to a secluded alcove, partially hidden by dense foliage. It was secluded yet accessible, with enough space to build a comfortable living area. Here, Sera said, stopping and gesturing to the open space. I think this will be a good place for your home. Looks good to me, Ermo said, before turning towards Alpa. What do you think? Alpa tilted her head at first, then shrugged lightly. No complaints from me. If nothing else, I'll start, Sera said. She extended her hands to channel her magic. The ground rumbled as roots from the surrounding trees surged upward with a low, rumbling sound. They moved like serpents, intertwining to form a small house. Each root wove together tightly, creating walls that looked both natural and magical, their surfaces rough yet sturdy. As the structure rose, bark and leaves joined the roots, adding texture and form to the walls. The bark was smooth in some places, rough in others, and the leaves rustled softly as they settled into their new positions. With a flick of her wrist, Sera directed the roots to grow into the shape of a roof. Wooden furniture emerged from the ground, seamlessly growing into the space. Chairs, a table, and even a cozy bed formed from the tree roots, each piece intricate and beautifully crafted. The chairs had elegant, curved backs, the table was sturdy and smooth, and the bed looked inviting with its soft, leaf-strewn surface. Flowers blossomed along the walls and windowsills, their petals vibrant and fragrant, adding splashes of color and a sweet fragrance to the air. Alpa's eyes were wide as she watched everything unfold, while Ermo's tail flicked with excitement. The house was simple yet enchanting, a perfect blend of nature and comfort. Faye clapped her hands in delight. It's like a fairy house. Thank you, Auntie Sera. Sera turned to the couple. Will this suffice? You really didn't have to put this much effort into it, boss, Ermo said nervously. Well, it's here now, so I'll show you all inside, Sera said. She led them inside, pointing out the different features. Here is the main living area, she said, gesturing to the space with the wooden furniture. You have a table and chairs for dining, and over there is your bed. Alpa's enthusiasm bubbled over as she explored the space. This is amazing. I can already imagine what we'll do with it. We'll add some cushions here, maybe hang some decorative lights there. Oh, and a little herb garden by the window would be perfect. Ermo chuckled, clearly delighted by Alpa's excitement. You've outdone yourself, boss. This is more than we could have asked for. Sera smiled, pleased with their reactions. I'm glad you like it. Feel free to make it your own. This is your space now. Alpa continued to detail her plans, her eyes shining with joy. We can use the flowers for herbal remedies, and the leaves for teas. Oh, and we'll definitely need a little shelf for our books and trinkets. Ermo nodded along. Maybe a small workshop outside for crafting, and we could set up a little area for the thornlings to play nearby. Faye beamed, looking around with wonder. This is going to be the best house ever. Sera waved off their thanks with a modest smile. I'm happy to see you all so excited. But I'll leave you to it for now. Sera stepped into the white forest, breath visible in the frigid air. The trees around her had barks that glistened like crystalline ice, capturing and refracting the faint light filtering through the canopy. Each branch was adorned with delicate white leaves that shimmered as if dusted with frost, sparkling almost as if they were tiny diamonds. She took her time exploring, noting the intricate patterns formed by the ice on the tree trunks. This place feels familiar for some reason, perhaps I'll ask Winter about it should I get the chance in the future. As she ventured deeper, Sera's eyes caught movement among the trees. She soon spotted the frost banshees. They floated just above the ground, their ghostly forms draped in tattered, ice-blue shrouds that trailed behind them like wisps of smoke. Their faces were gaunt and hollow, with eyes that glowed an eerie, cold blue. As they moved, the air around them appeared to crystallize, freezing anything they passed through. Sera watched in awe as the frost crept along the ground and up the trees, leaving a trail of ice in their wake. The banshees' movements were hypnotic, swaying gently as they glided forward with an ethereal grace. Upon noticing Sera, they changed course, drifting toward her silently. The banshees halted a few paces away and bowed their heads in unison, a silent acknowledgement of her presence and authority. A pleasant surprise. Sera took a step closer. She studied the delicate contours of their translucent forms, the way the light passed through their bodies. Can you speak? The banshees exchanged glances, their hollow eyes flickering with an unspoken understanding. Slowly, they shook their heads, the motion almost imperceptible, yet undeniably clear. Ah, so none of them can speak after all. Sera pondered this for a moment as she considered their silence. But can you screech like normal banshees? In response, the frost banshees nodded all at once. Their icy blue eyes seemed to brighten, a cold fire igniting within their depths. Can you show me? Sera watched closely as the banshees exchanged hesitant glances, their eyes reflecting both uncertainty and determination. One of them raised a bony, translucent hand, as if asking for her final confirmation. The Elder Dryad smiled slightly. I'm completely sure. Even if my eardrums get damaged, I can regenerate them. The banshees appeared reluctant, their ethereal forms shimmering with uncertainty. But finally, one of them floated forward, positioning itself to unleash its screech. The air around it grew colder, a sign of the power it was about to release. Sera brought her hands to her ears, fingers pressing tightly against them. Go ahead, she instructed, bracing herself for what was to come. The frost banshee took a deep breath, its translucent skin stretching as it prepared. Then, it unleashed an ear-wrenching screech. The sound was so powerful it froze the very air, ice crystals forming mid-air and falling like delicate snowflakes. Pain exploded in Sera's ears, a sharp, stinging sensation that made her gasp. Bits of black sap leaked from her ear canals, a stark contrast against her pale skin. The world around her spun, the piercing sound reverberating in her skull, disorienting and relentless. She staggered, knees buckling under the sheer force of the noise. When the screech ended, the banshees rushed to her side, faces etched with worry and remorse. Their hands fluttered around her, translucent fingers trying to offer comfort and assistance in their ghostly, intangible way. Sera waved them off, her voice strained but firm. I'm fine, she assured them, though her hearing was still compromised. The ringing in her ears was deafening, a constant, high-pitched whine that made it difficult to focus. But she simply closed her eyes, concentrating on her natural regenerative abilities and willed her body to heal. Gradually, the ringing subsided. Clarity soon returned to Sera's ears as the normal sounds of the forest filtered back in. She took a deep breath, opening her eyes to the worried faces of the frost banshees. See? I told you I'd be fine. The banshees still looked apologetic, their heads bowed in a gesture of remorse. Sera reached out, her hand passing through the cold, ethereal form of the nearest banshee. Your abilities are impressive. Don't worry about me. This was a necessary test. The banshees seemed to relax slightly, their forms less tense. Sera stood up straight, brushing off the lingering discomfort. I suppose all that's left now is to test my glacial aegis. She walked around for a moment, absorbing the serene yet formidable landscape. The frost-covered trees stood tall and majestic, their icy branches glistening in the soft light. The snow beneath her feet crunched softly with each step, creating a symphony of gentle sounds that blended with the stillness of the white forest. She closed her eyes, the cold air filling her lungs as she inhaled deeply. With a focused thought, she called out internally, Zoha. Before long, the familiar sound of buzzing flies reached her ears, starting as a faint hum and growing louder until it enveloped her completely. When Sera opened her eyes, Zoha stood before her, her form composed of countless flies that swirled and solidified into a graceful figure. Greeting, mistress, what would you have me do? I've done almost everything that I need to do in the dungeon, except I still need to test a new ability that I've acquired. Hence, I'd like your help with that. Understood, mistress. But is something the matter? Surprisingly, Zoha's playful demeanor faltered. Her posture stiffened, and a hint of nervousness crept into her eyes. Mistress, this might be sudden, but can I ask you for help? She glanced down briefly, hands wringing together in an uncharacteristic display of anxiety, before looking back up at Sera with a pleading look. That depends, what do you want from me and why? My mother is actually very sick, and you're the most capable I know. I didn't ask earlier because I was worried you might take my request as an insult, but now. I don't mind, take me to her. Sera said, breaking off her antlers while her dress morphed into a familiar hooded cloak. Chapter 39 Canary. Sera stopped in front of a quaint two-story shop house. The building exuded an old-world charm, with flower boxes brimming with colorful blooms adorning the windowsills. Above the door, a hand-painted sign swayed gently in the breeze, the words Frida's Florals scripted in flowing letters. Sera turned to Zoha, adjusting a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Shall I go in? Zoha nodded. By all means, go ahead, mistress. Satisfied, Sera nodded in return and pushed open the shop door. A small bell tinkled softly above as a human girl looked up from behind the counter, pausing in the midst of arranging a bouquet. Her eyes widened as she saw them enter. Miss Zoha. Madame Frida's condition has worsened. Zoha immediately stepped forward. What happened? The girl wrung her hands. She's been getting weaker by the hour. Her breathing is shallow, and she hasn't been able to eat anything. I don't know what to do. Zoha placed a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. You've done enough, we'll handle it from here. The demoness led Sera upstairs with an urgent pace, the wooden stairs creaked under their weight, adding an eerie echo to their ascent. As they reached the upper floor, the scent of flowers was replaced by the sterile smell of illness. Frida was lying on a bed in the center of the room, looking gaunt and frail. Her skin was pale and sallow, stretched thin over her bones, and her eyes were sunken and dull. Wisps of grey hair clung to her forehead, and her breathing was shallow and labored. A human mother, adoptive or not, was not something I had expected from Zoha. Still, she will owe me if I cure her mother, and it will not cost me anything. Sera approached the bed and knelt beside Frida, hovering her hands over the old woman's chest. Closing her eyes, Sera took a deep breath, channeling her magic. A soft, green light emanated from her hands, growing brighter and more intense with each passing second. The light enveloped Frida, its warmth penetrating her frail body. Sera could feel the life force flowing from her, a gentle but powerful current of energy. She focused on the rhythm of Frida's heartbeat, matching her breaths to the old woman's shallow inhales and exhales. The light pulsed in time with their synchronized breathing, infusing Frida with vitality and strength. Gradually, color returned to Frida's cheeks. Her breathing steadied, becoming deeper and more regular. The lines of pain and exhaustion on her face softened, replaced by an almost serene expression. Sera continued to channel her magic until she felt the last vestiges of illness leave Frida's body. When she finally withdrew her hands, the room was silent, save for the steady, rhythmic sound of Frida's breathing. That should be sufficient. But in a matter of seconds, Zoha was unable to contain herself any longer and rushed forward. She wrapped her arms around Frida in a tight embrace, clutching the fabric of the blanket with desperate relief. "Mom!" Zoha cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're okay." Frida smiled and hugged Zoha back. Tears of relief glistened in Frida's eyes as well, creating tiny, sparkling trails down her weathered cheeks. Then, she looked over Zoha's shoulder, looking towards Sera with gratitude. "Words cannot express how grateful I am for what you did, thank you, really. It was nothing, really. No need to be so humble." Frida said with a chuckle. "But, I've never seen a healer like you before. What is your name?" Sera stood up slowly, brushing her hands on her cloak. "You can call me Sera. More importantly, how do you feel?" Frida took a moment to assess herself, moving her limbs with tentative curiosity. She wiggled her fingers and flexed her arms, then sat up with surprising ease. "I feel great, better than I have in years. I don't know how to thank you." Sera nodded and let out a slight smile. "Your recovery is thanks enough." "Missed Sera, thank you for saving her." Zoha exclaimed, catching herself mid-sentence. "It's nothing, really. I was more than happy to help," Sera said. She made a point of looking directly at Frida as she spoke with a warm expression. A touch of humility in her eyes made her sincerity shine through. It never hurts to try and maintain a good image. Frida swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up with surprising agility. Her movements were smooth, and she took a moment to relish the strength she felt coursing through her body. "Please, let me make you some tea to thank you for everything." Sera shook her head. "Thank you, but I should." "Are you sure?" Frida interrupted gently. "I also have cookies and pastries fresh from the bakery." At the mention of pastries, Sera's resolve crumbled. She couldn't resist the thought of a sweet treat. "Well, in that case, I suppose I could stay for a bit longer." "Well, come on down then." The three of them headed to the lower floor. Frida moved with newfound vigor, bustling about as she laid out an assortment of cookies and pastries on a small, round table before grabbing some tea. Zoha took a seat at the polished table. She adjusted her chair and folded her hands in her lap. Sera joined her, her gaze lingering on the assortment of treats and pastries laid out before them. Frida moved gracefully around the table as she poured the tea, the rich amber liquid cascading into porcelain cups with a gentle, soothing sound. As everyone settled in, Zoha lifted her cup and took a sip, savoring the flavors and the comforting heat that spread through her. Across the table, Sera reached for a pastry, feeling the flaky crust beneath her touch. But suddenly, a sudden knock echoed through the shop. All three women paused, their attention snapping toward the door. "Don't worry, I'll get it," Frida said. She moved toward the door, grasped the handle and pulled the door open, revealing a familiar figure standing on the threshold. Dante. Dante stepped inside, his broad smile lighting up his face as he enveloped Frida in a warm hug. Hey Mom! Zoha's eyes narrowed slightly. Dante, what are you doing here? Her posture stiffened, and she set her cup down with a faint clink. Dante's expression shifted instantly, his smile fading into a serious frown. He pulled back from the embrace. I need to talk, it's really important. But as his gaze swept the room and landed on Sera, he nearly jumped back. He froze, eyes wide with shock, the color draining slightly from his face. Frida noticed his reaction and frowned with concern. Are you okay, sweetie? Dante shook his head quickly, trying to regain his composure. I am fine, Mom. He glanced at Sera again. I just wasn't expecting to see someone new here. Sera leaned back in her chair, fingers lightly tapping the edge of her teacup. Dante, you should join us for tea, I'm sure you could use some rest. Before Dante could respond, Frida clapped her hands together. That's an excellent idea. Come, sit, she urged, pulling over a chair and patting it invitingly. Reluctantly, he sank into the chair. Frida beamed at him, eyes warm with affection. I'll just get some more tea. You three catch up, she said, bustling off deeper into the shop. An awkward silence settled over the table as Frida left the room. Zoha sipped her tea, looking nervously between Sera and Dante. The delicate porcelain cup clinked softly against its saucer as she set it down, fingers fidgeting slightly. Meanwhile, Sera slowly reached for a pastry. The flaky crust crumbled softly under her fingers, a few golden crumbs falling onto the plate as she took a bite. The rich, buttery flavor melted on her tongue. I'll give it a few more seconds. Dante finally broke the silence. So, are you Zoha's mistress? He asked, his gaze flickering between Sera and his sister. Sera arched an eyebrow, a playful glint in her eyes as she feigned innocence. What makes you think that? I put two and two together when I saw Zoha and Mom looking healthy. Plus, the way Zoha defers to you, it wasn't hard to figure out. Sera smiled as she lightly traced the rim of her teacup. Aren't you a smart one? Tell you what, I'll give you one chance to convince me not to force you into a contract as well. Dante's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'll work with you. I never had any intention of going against an Elder Dryad, it's a losing game. Very well, Sera said, taking another sip of her tea. As a reward for your cooperation, I'll spare you from a contract, for now. Zoha watched the exchange with a mix of curiosity and relief, her fingers lightly drumming on the table. Dante relaxed further, reaching for a cookie and taking a tentative bite. The silence that followed was more comfortable as tension eased from the room. Soon, Frida returned with a fresh pot of tea. I hope you're all getting along, she said, pouring the steaming liquid into their cups. Sera nodded. We are, Frida. Thank you for the tea. It's lovely. Frida beamed, her hands busy arranging the remaining pastries on a delicate porcelain plate. I'm glad to hear it, she said, her voice filled with warmth. She placed the plate in the center of the table, her gaze lingering on the three of them with a satisfied air. Dante cleared his throat politely. Mom, there's something I need to discuss with just Sera and Zoha. Do you mind leaving us alone for a bit? Always keeping secrets from me, Dante, Frida teased, shaking her head playfully. Dante smiled sheepishly. It's nothing personal, Mom. Just something we need to handle. Frida sighed dramatically. All right, I'll leave you all to it. But remember, Dante, you'll have to tell me all your secrets eventually. Zoha gave Frida a grateful smile. Thanks Mom. You're welcome, dear. I'll be upstairs if you need anything. With that, Frida turned and ascended the stairs, leaving the three of them alone. An awkward silence settled over the room once more. Zoha fidgeted slightly, fingers tracing patterns on the teacup in front of her. But this time, it was Sera who broke the silence. So, Dante, why did you come here? He took a deep breath before answering. There are two reasons. First, I wanted to check on Frida and make sure she was all right. Second, I just had an encounter with an inquisitor. And why would an inquisitor be of note? Mistress, inquisitors in Lizaria are very powerful figures. Zoha said. Their recruitment process is secretive, and they are known for their strength and influence. I've never seen one in person, so if Dante met one, it can't be good news. Dante nodded in agreement. The Inquisitor tried to kill me and got awfully close too. Sera's eyes narrowed slightly. Tell me everything. Dante took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. I was rehearsing for a performance in the city. Everything was going smoothly until an Inquisitor with blue hair and red eyes showed up. From the moment I saw her, I had a bad feeling. But I pretended to play it cool at first. What happened after that? The Inquisitor started asking around for information regarding dungeons, Dante continued, his brow furrowing at the memory. He picked up a cookie, breaking it in half absent-mindedly. She was persistent, and it was clear she was looking for information regarding dungeons. It went well enough at first, but then she started threatening me and things escalated from there. Sera noted this, her fingers tapping the rim of her teacup. You said earlier you almost died to this Inquisitor. How did it come to that? Dante sighed, running a hand through his hair. I believe this Inquisitor is an angel. I have no idea how the Inquisition managed to get their hands on one, but her power was unmistakable. It's only a matter of time before she hunts us down. Zoha twirled a strand of her hair around her finger. The bad feeling I had a long time ago, it must have been that Inquisitor reawakening. I felt it too. And now, I'm not sure how to deal with an angel. Dante said. Think for a moment, Sera said, leaning forward and placing her hands flat on the table. Angels are powerful beings who don't normally mix with mortals, let alone serve them. The Lizarians must have put the angel under some kind of mind control. You might be right. When I was fighting her, there was a moment when she clutched her head as if in pain. It was brief, but noticeable. That means we still have time. From my understanding, this Inquisitor must have originally been sent to investigate my dungeon after Prince Leo's death. You, Dante, unfortunately got caught in the investigation. I understand that much, mistress. But do you have a plan? Zoha asked. Sera leaned back, drumming her fingers on the table. For now, I'll continue to rebuild the Black Eagles and funnel more people into my dungeon. I foresee a possible conflict with this Inquisitor in the future, and we need to be prepared. Meanwhile, Dante, you should lay low for a while. Keep your eyes and ears open, and inform Zoha if you find anything important. Yes ma'am. Dante said, smiling slightly as he did a mock salute. Chapter 40 Redistribution. Black Eagle's Hideout, Underground Arena. Sera entered the meeting room, her presence announced by her footsteps echoing against the metal walls. The room could best be described as utilitarian, its cold surfaces reflecting the harsh light from overhead lamps. While in the center, a large, polished wooden desk commanded attention. She paused for a moment, taking in the space and the people within it. Zoha had already sat at the desk along with the other Black Eagle leaders, Ilera, Jarek, Kiran, and Myra. Their eyes followed Sera's every move as she approached the head of the table. Each leader had a distinct demeanor, Ilera's sharp gaze, Jarek's furrowed brow, Kiran's calm composure, and Myra's subtle tension all painted a picture of their individual concerns. Nothing out of the ordinary for now it seems. Sera took her seat with an air of authority. Let's get started. For the first order of business, I want information on the Black Eagle's finances. Immediately, Kiran sorted through a stack of documents laid out before him. He flipped through the papers until he found the key reports, which rustled softly as he selected the documents and handed them to Sera. While she looked over the documents, absorbing the details, Kiran started to explain. Our income sources are diversified. He leaned forward slightly, pointing to various sections of the reports. Around 50% of our revenue comes from potion sales. The slave trade accounts for about 30%, followed by ransoms at 15%, and miscellaneous activities, which include dungeon core raids, make up the remaining 5%. Sera's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked up from the papers. I'm surprised dungeon core raids make up such a small part of the organization's income. We only resort to dungeon core raids when we need cash fast. Raiding a dungeon core is resource-intensive and time-consuming. Plus, finding a buyer for a dungeon core isn't always easy, and the returns aren't guaranteed. How is the organization structured in terms of money flow? Who pays whom? Kiran paused. You want to know how the money is distributed within the organization? Precisely, I want to understand the financial hierarchy. Sera said. We operate on a pyramid structure. The leaders at the top take percentage cuts from the earnings of those below them. Each level takes a portion of the earnings from the level beneath them, and so on down the line. This system could, no, it will lead to problems down the line. Suddenly, Jarek leaned forward, brow furrowed in thought. Why do you say that, boss? Think about it for a second. This system does incentivize recruitment, but is inherently unsustainable in the long term because the people at the lower end of the pyramid will likely receive little to no money. Jarek looked puzzled. What's wrong with that? Myra chuckled and smirked. Serves the newbies right. They should pay their fair share. But Sera shook her head disapprovingly. The issue is that the Black Eagles likely won't attract the best talent with this system. We're going to end up with people who are desperate or foolish, perhaps both. Perhaps Vittorio and Vega were content to receive scraps, but I want the cream of the crop. Jarek shrugged, considering her words. I guess you're right. But in that case, what's your plan, boss? The Black Eagles should adopt a more conventional compensation plan. Offer fixed salaries with opportunities for bonuses or promotions based on performance. This will allow us to be more selective in the people we recruit and motivate those at the bottom to keep working. But, who's gonna pay for all that? All of us here will, one way or another. I'll give the details of these payments in a later meeting, but of course, if any of you are unwilling to contribute to these salaries, please voice your concerns. And no, I think fixed salaries are actually a great idea, boss. With none of the other Black Eagle leaders saying anything, Sera took a deep breath, fingers interlacing on the table as she surveyed the room. Let's move on to discussing major threats next. Ilera spoke first. The authorities in Marwood generally overlook our operations due to well-placed bribes. But, there's been increased chatter about some higher UPS becoming more curious about our activities. That makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if word even makes it as far as to the Inquisition eventually. And if that's the case, bribes alone won't be enough. Yeah, just how it is, boss. Is Countess Ivirus involved at all? Myra, who had been quiet until now, shook her head. Countess Ivirus is clean, but the people around her are not. They take bribes and look the other way. Sera nodded thoughtfully. Good. The last thing we need is a powerful noble directly interfering with our plans. Are there any other gangs in Marwood that pose a significant threat? Jarek grunted. The Iron Gorgons are the biggest threat right now. They've been gradually chipping away at us over the years, and they'll only become more of a problem if left alone. Sera tapped her fingers on the table. We need to get a leg up on them. One way to do that is by improving the types of potions we're selling. Using more rare herbs like Viper Shade and Ether Wisp will set us apart. We can also introduce new exclusive herbs that hardly anyone else knows about. Kieran raised an eyebrow. Don't mean to be rude, boss, but how do you plan on getting those herbs? They're not exactly easy to come by. I have my own ways. Trust me, we'll have what we need to make our potions superior. The room was silent for a moment before Ilera spoke up. If you can deliver on that, it would give us a significant advantage. But we'll need to move quickly. The Iron Gorgons won't wait for us to get our act together. Agreed, Sera said. Then, Sera held up a hand as she motioned for the leaders to remain seated. Before this meeting is adjourned, there's one more matter to discuss. Our numbers must have taken a hit recently. I want each of you to go on a recruitment drive. We need to bolster our ranks and entice more members to join. Ilera leaned forward, her long hair catching the light. We could target the folks in the slums. Offer them a chance at a better life, protection, and purpose. She tapped her manicured nails on the polished wood of the table, emphasizing her point. Jarek grunted in agreement, crossing his arms over his chest. I say we just pick from the participants in the underground arena. There are always strong, desperate souls looking for a way out. Maybe we should focus on the mercenaries and adventurers who roam the outskirts of Marwood. They have combat experience and could be persuaded to join for the right price and incentives. Kieran said. Myra nodded. Don't forget about the artisans and traders. We need support staff too, people who can provide supplies and services. We could offer them protection in exchange for their loyalty and goods. Sera listened to each suggestion, her expression impassive. When they finished, she stood and addressed them. It seems all of you have some idea on how to do this recruitment, which is good. However, we will need to finance this new recruitment drive. Any ideas on how we could gather funds as quickly as possible? The leaders exchanged puzzled glances but didn't question her decision. Before they could discuss further, Zoha interjected. Wait, don't Vega and Vittorio keep their money around the area? Vega does keep his money here, in a vault on the lower floors. But Vito keeps his money in a bank in the capital. Kieran said. We could just give away Vega's money to attract recruits. Zoha said. Myra exhaled an exasperated sigh. Vega's money is kept on a secure floor with guardian golems and magical defenses, won't be easy. Sera turned towards the door. We'll manage just fine, everyone gather all of your people, we're heading down to that vault. Sera stood in front of the large set of iron doors, grazing the cold metal with her fingers. Intricate runes, glowing faintly, covered the surface, their lines interweaving in a mesmerizing pattern. She studied them for a moment, noting the complexity and the subtle pulse of magic within each carved symbol. Rather rudimentary all things considered. Kieran stepped beside her. These doors are secured by runes that can only be activated using Vega's blood. Sera let out a soft, almost mocking laugh. I'll manage just fine. May I borrow a dagger? Sure, no problem. Kieran quickly handed her a small dagger. Sera examined it briefly before making a deliberate cut across her palm. Black sap oozed from the wound, thick and glossy. She noticed the eyes of everyone except Zoha fixed on the unusual liquid, but no one dared to make a comment. No use saying anything if they won't either. Ignoring their stares, Sera pressed her bleeding hand against the runes, allowing the black sap to smear over the glowing symbols. The sap seeped into the grooves, the runes flickering in response. The runes pulsed erratically, fighting against the intrusion of her sap and magic. Sera's eyes narrowed in concentration as she traced the intricate lines with her fingers, pushing her power into the iron. The sap acted as a conduit, disrupting the flow of the original magic. This shouldn't take too long. With a final surge of determination, Sera felt the enchantment give way. The runes dimmed, their light snuffed out under the force of her power. The doors groaned in protest, their mechanisms creaking as they slowly swung open. A gust of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of dust and old metal. Sera stepped through the doorway, leaving the others to follow in her wake. The room beyond was vast, its high ceiling disappearing into shadow. Tall, imposing golems stood sentinel along the walls, their stone bodies intricately carved with elaborate patterns. Meanwhile, the floor was a treacherous labyrinth of traps, pressure plates, and enchanted runes, all meticulously designed to deter intruders. Sera turned to her team. Jarruk, take your strike team and engage the golems. Myra, focus on neutralizing the traps. Kieran, provide support and watch for any hidden defenses. She then faced Zoha. Use your threads to help Myra disarm the traps and assist where needed. The demoness nodded and immediately started to weave patterns in the air. Silken threads materialized, glinting in the dim light as they snaked towards the traps, aiding Myra in disarming them. Jarruk signaled his team, who fanned out to confront the golems. The first clash echoed through the chamber as stone met steel. Jarruk's team fought with coordinated strikes. Myra knelt by the nearest trap and set down her toolkit. She worked carefully, brow furrowed in concentration. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as she carefully deactivated them one by one, using tiny screwdrivers and pliers to manipulate the delicate components. The runes flickered and dimmed, their power fading away, leaving the path incrementally safer for her comrades. Nearby, Zoha worked in tandem with Myra by using her enchanted threads. The silken threads intertwined with the traps, they added an extra layer of finesse and speed to the process of disarming them. Kieran and Alara stood at the ready, both looking around the room for any signs of additional threats. The two watched the battle unfold with keen attention, senses heightened to detect any shift in the room's magical defenses. After some time, the path to the vault doors at the end of the room was cleared. Sera walked towards them and noted how these doors were even more imposing than the first, covered in even more intricate runes and multiple locks. She paused for a moment, tracing the patterns of the runes. Her mind worked quickly, assessing the layers of defenses before her. Surprisingly complex, probably better to work around it. Sera took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task before her. She leaned forward slightly and spat a few seeds into her hand. Then, she inserted the seeds into the loose crevices around the vault door. She pressed them firmly into the small gaps, ensuring they were secure. The runes on the door flared briefly, reacting to the foreign objects, but then subsided as the seeds settled in. Sera stepped back and waited for a few seconds. Slowly, the seeds sprouted, delicate tendrils unfurling into silverthorn vines that grew rapidly. The vines crept along the surface of the vault door, their thorns digging into the metal and stone. The runes flickered and dimmed as the vines spread, disrupting the enchantments woven into the door. The metal groaned under the pressure, cracking and faltering. Finally, the vines tightened their grip, and the vault door shuddered as it detached from its frame, landing with a resounding crash. Sera stepped into the vault, scanning the room with a keen, appraising gaze. "Let's see what we have here." The interior was filled with piles of gold coins and gleaming jewelry. The walls were lined with shelves, each one overflowing with ornate trinkets, gemstones, and intricately crafted artifacts. Behind her, Zoha and the rest of the Black Eagles followed, their expressions visibly showing both awe and greed. Jarek's eyes widened at the sight of a chest brimming with gold, while Myra's fingers twitched towards a delicate necklace encrusted with emeralds. Zoha, though more reserved, couldn't hide the spark of excitement in her eyes as she surveyed the riches before them. Sera raised a hand, silencing the murmur of excitement that had begun to rise among her team. "Stay calm, we'll handle this methodically." The eagerness in the room subsided, replaced by a respectful silence as they waited for her instructions. Sera moved to the center of the vault, her mind already calculating how best to allocate the treasure. "We need to ensure that this windfall benefits the Black Eagles as a whole. 3/4 of the gold coins will be reserved for future operations. This will provide us with the financial stability we need to continue expanding our influence and capabilities." Ilera, her fingers still twitching slightly, spoke up. "And the remaining quarter?" "The remaining gold will be divided among the team members based as an incentive. This includes not just those present, but all other members as well," Sera said. Afterwards, she turned her attention back to the vault's contents. "Everyone, help me sort the coins and jewelry. We need to ensure everything is accounted for and divided fairly."